Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and just relax. The hotel room. I was only 10 years old when it happened, though the memory remains as vivid as if it occurred yesterday. My parents had planned this vacation to Turkey for months, coordinating with my two best friends' families so we could all travel together. Jake was 12, making him the second oldest of our trio, while Marcus held the position of elder statesman at 13. Despite the age differences, we were inseparable back home, and the prospect of exploring a foreign country together had us buzzing with excitement for weeks before departure. The hotel wasn't particularly luxurious, but it had a certain charm that appealed to us kids. The lobby featured intricate tile work that told stories of Ottoman glory, and the hallways smelled perpetually of strong coffee and sweet baklava from the restaurant downstairs. Our parents had booked adjoining rooms on the third floor, with a connecting door that they left open during the day so we could run back and forth freely. The arrangement felt perfect, giving us just enough independence to feel grown-up while keeping us within earshot of adult supervision. That particular evening started like any other during our 2-week stay. The Turkish heat had finally begun to dissipate as the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked almost unreal through our hotel window. Our parents announced they were heading down to the hotel's main restaurant for what they called adult dinner time, which we knew meant they wanted to enjoy their meal without having to constantly remind us about table manners or stop us from sword fighting with breadsticks. "We'll be back by 11, my mother promised, kissing my forehead in that way that usually embarrassed me but somehow felt reassuring in this unfamiliar place. "You boys stay in the room, order room service if you get hungry, and don't answer the door for anyone except hotel staff, understood?" We nodded eagerly, already planning our evening of unsupervised freedom. The moment our parents disappeared into the elevator, we transformed the hotel room into our personal kingdom. Jake had brought his portable DVD player, a technological marvel at the time, and we huddled around its small screen watching episodes of The Simpsons while sprawled across the king-sized bed. Marcus had somehow convinced his mom to let him pack the travel edition of Monopoly, and we set it up on the floor, using Turkish lira as extra playing pieces when we lost the thimble somewhere under the bed. The room itself was spacious by European standards, with high ceilings decorated with elaborate crown molding and a balcony that overlooked the hotel's inner courtyard. The walls were painted a warm terracotta color that glowed golden in the lamplight, and the air conditioning hummed steadily, providing relief from the residual heat that clung to the evening air. Everything felt safe and contained, like we were in our own private fortress 3 stories above the bustling Turkish streets. As the hours passed, our sugar-fueled energy began to wane. Jake kept checking his digital watch, a gift from his last birthday that he wore constantly, announcing the time every 15 minutes. "It's already past midnight," he observed, peering through the gauze curtains at the restaurant below. "I can still see them down there, laughing and carrying on like they forgot we exist." "My dad's probably telling his stupid fishing stories again," Marcus groaned, rolling his eyes. "Once he gets started, we'll be here until sunrise." The knock came at exactly 1:07 a.m. I remember the precise time because Jake had just announced it, and the sound made us all freeze mid-conversation. It wasn't the polite, professional rap of knuckles that hotel staff typically used. This was different, more insistent, almost aggressive in its rhythm. 3 heavy thuds that seemed to reverberate through the door and into my chest. "Room service," came a voice from the hallway, but something about it sent ice through my veins. The accent was wrong, too thick and unfamiliar, not like the carefully practiced English of the hotel employees we'd encountered throughout our stay. Marcus, ever the brave one, started toward the door, but I grabbed his arm. "We didn't order anything," I whispered, my voice cracking with fear I couldn't quite explain. So what? Marcus shrugged, though I noticed he'd stopped moving forward. Maybe our parents sent something up for us. The knocking came again, harder this time, and the voice grew more demanding. Open door, please. I have delivery for room. Jake crept to the window and peered down at the restaurant again. They're still eating, he reported in a hushed tone. They wouldn't have ordered anything yet. We stood frozen in the center of the room, none of us willing to approach the door. The silence stretched between us and whoever stood on the other side of that barrier. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, so loud I was certain the person in the hallway could hear it too. Then, cutting through the quiet like a blade, came a different sound that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable click and scratch of a key card being inserted into the lock. "He's trying to get in," I whimpered, tears already streaming down my face. At 10 years old, I'd never felt terror like this. It was primal, instinctive, every cell in my body screaming danger. The door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately, and that's when Marcus snapped into action. "Bathroom!" he hissed, shoving both Jake and me toward the small in soot. We scrambled inside, Marcus slamming and locking the door behind us just as we heard the main door to our room creak open. The bathroom was cramped with all three of us inside, barely enough room to stand between the toilet and the tiny shower stall. We pressed ourselves against the far wall, trying to become as small as possible. Through the thin door, we could hear footsteps moving through our room, heavy and deliberate. Drawers opened and closed. The closet door squeaked on its hinges. The intruder was searching for something, or someone. "Children," the voice called out, sickeningly sweet now, like honey poured over broken glass. "Where are you, little ones? I have presents. Candy from the kitchen. Come out, come out." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood, desperate to muffle the sobs threatening to escape. Jake had his arms around me, and I could feel him trembling just as violently as I was. Marcus stood closest to the door, his ear pressed against it, one hand gripping the doorknob as if his 13-year-old strength could somehow keep out whatever monster had invaded our sanctuary. The footsteps grew closer, stopping right outside the bathroom door. The handle rattled as the intruder tested it, found it locked. Then came the pounding, so forceful the entire door shook in its frame. "Open this door immediately." The fake sweetness was gone, replaced by raw anger that made me understand, even at that young age, that we were in the presence of someone truly dangerous. That's when Jake remembered the phone. His mother, always prepared for emergencies, had left her international cell phone on the bathroom counter so we could call if needed. With shaking fingers, he dialed his father's number. The wait for the connection felt eternal, each ring competing with the continued assault on our door. "Dad!" Jake's voice was barely a whisper when the call finally connected. "Someone's in our room. We're locked in the bathroom. Please come now. Please." I couldn't hear his father's response, but I saw Jake nod frantically. "He's trying to break down the door. We're scared. Please hurry." The pounding stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps moving away from the bathroom. The main door to our room slammed shut, and then silence. We stayed huddled in that bathroom for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before we heard familiar voices shouting our names. "Boys, open up. It's us." My father's voice had never sounded so wonderful. When we finally emerged, we found the room ransacked. Our belongings were scattered everywhere, drawers pulled out, mattresses askew. The hotel manager arrived with security, and they reviewed the footage from the hallway cameras. What they found chilled everyone to the bone. The man had been using a master key card, likely stolen or duplicated from housekeeping. He'd been caught on camera following us earlier that day, watching us at the pool, lurking near the elevator when we went up to our room. The footage showed him trying several other rooms on our floor before succeeding with ours. When he heard Jake on the phone, he'd fled down the stairwell, disappearing into the maze of Antalia's back streets. The police were called, and over the next few days, the investigation revealed the true horror of what we'd narrowly escaped. The man was identified as someone who'd been targeting tourist families, specifically those with children. He'd been linked to several disappearances over the past year, though this was the first time he'd been caught on camera or interrupted in the act. We spent the remainder of our vacation in a different hotel, one with better security and rooms on the 7th floor. Our parents never left us alone again for the duration of the trip. The three of us slept in the same room every night, taking comfort in each other's presence. We never spoke about that night directly, but I know Jake and Marcus were haunted by it just as I was. Years later, I learned that the man was eventually caught attempting a similar crime at another hotel. The police found evidence linking him to numerous unsolved cases involving missing children throughout the region. We had been unbelievably lucky that night, saved by Jake's mother's foresight in leaving her phone and our collective decision to hide rather than confront the intruder. The park at dusk. 5 years had passed since the hotel incident, and at 15, I like to think I'd grown tougher, more capable of handling myself in dangerous situations. I was taller now, having hit my growth spurt the previous summer, and my voice had finally stopped cracking at embarrassing moments. My mother still worried, of course, especially after what had happened in Turkey, but she'd gradually learned to give me more independence. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and the air carried that distinct autumn chill that makes you reach for a jacket even when you're not quite cold yet. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, carpeting our suburban neighborhood in a crunching layer that my 7-year-old brother, Tommy, loved to kick through on his way home from school. Mom had gone to the grocery store, leaving me in charge with her usual list of instructions and emergency numbers posted on the refrigerator. "I'll be back in 2 hours maximum," she'd promised, grabbing her purse and keys. "Tommy's allowed to play outside until dark, but make sure he stays where you can see him. There's leftover pizza in the fridge if you get hungry." I'd waved her off, already absorbed in my PlayStation game, confident in my ability to manage one small kid for a couple of hours. Tommy had immediately announced he was going outside to practice soccer, dragging his black and white ball from the garage with determination that belied his small stature. He idolized Ronaldo and spent every free moment attempting to recreate the player's signature moves. "Stay in the front yard," I'd called after him, not bothering to look up from my game, "where I can see you through the window." "The yard's too small," Tommy had whined in that particular tone 7-year-olds perfect. "Can I go to the park? It's just around the corner. Please." The park in question was barely a 2-minute walk from our house, a small community space with a playground, basketball court, and wide-open field perfect for soccer practice. We'd been there hundreds of times, and Tommy knew the rule about coming straight home when the streetlights came on. "Fine," I'd relented, still focused on my game. "But be back before dark, and I mean it, Tommy. The second you see those lights flicker on, you run home." He'd promised enthusiastically and bounded out the door, his soccer ball tucked under his skinny arm. I'd settled deeper into the couch, confident I'd hear him return within the hour. The first indication something was wrong came when my sister Emma emerged from her room, where she'd been video chatting with friends. "Where's Tommy?" she asked, glancing at the clock on the cable box. "It's been dark for like 20 minutes. My stomach dropped as I realized she was right. The autumn darkness had crept in while I was absorbed in my game, and the streetlights were now glowing orange through our living room window. I jumped up, calling Tommy's name as I checked every room in the house, hoping he'd snuck back in without me noticing. Empty. "He went to the park," I told Emma, already pulling on my sneakers. "Watch the house. I'll be right back." The walk to the park had never felt longer. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every rustle of leaves made my heart race. The park, when I reached it, was completely deserted. The playground equipment stood like skeletal remains in the dim light from the street lamps, and the soccer field stretched empty and dark beyond. Tommy's favorite goalposts stood abandoned. No sign of a small boy or his prized soccer ball. "Tommy!" I shouted, my voice cracking not from puberty this time, but from fear. "Tommy, this isn't funny. Mom's going to be home soon." Only silence answered me. I walked the perimeter of the park, checking behind the storage shed where sports equipment was kept, peering into the covered picnic area, even looking up into the large oak trees that Tommy sometimes climbed despite Mom's strict prohibition. Nothing. That's when I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it. A muffled cry, like someone trying to yell through fabric. It came from my left, near the thick hedge that separated the park from the adjoining neighborhood. As I turned toward the sound, I caught a glimpse of movement, a tall figure disappearing behind the massive wooden fence that ran along the park's eastern border. Every instinct screamed at me to run home, to call 911, to get help. But another part, the part that recognized my little brother's voice in that muffled cry, propelled me forward. I sprinted toward the fence, my longer legs eating up the distance in seconds. The fence had a gap where local kids had broken through boards to create a shortcut, and I squeezed through without hesitation. The alley on the other side was narrow and dark, lined with garbage cans and recycling bins from the houses that backed up to it. At first, I saw nothing. Then movement at the far end caught my eye. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, was dragging something. No, someone. Tommy's red jacket was unmistakable even in the poor light, his small body being pulled along like a rag doll. The rage that erupted in me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the fear of a 10-year-old boy hiding in a hotel bathroom. This was protective fury, primitive and overwhelming. I ran at the man with no plan, no thought beyond reaching my brother. My sneakers slapped against the wet pavement, and the sound must have alerted him because he spun around, dropping Tommy in the process. In the dim light, I could make out very little of his face, just a pale oval beneath a dark hood. He reached for me as I approached, his hands massive and grasping, but my momentum was too great. I slammed into him at full speed, my shoulder connecting with his midsection. The impact sent us both tumbling to the ground, him underneath, me rolling away and scrambling back to my feet. He cursed, trying to rise, but adrenaline had transformed me into something feral. I stomped down on his face with all my weight, feeling something crunch beneath my sneaker. He screamed, his hands going to his nose, and I used the opportunity to grab Tommy, hauling him up and over my shoulder in a fireman's carry I didn't know I was capable of. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, Tommy's weight bouncing against my back, his small hands clutching my shirt. Behind us, I could hear the man shouting, but his voice grew fainter as I increased the distance between us. I didn't stop running until we burst through our front door, nearly giving Emma a heart attack. "Call 911, I gasped, depositing Tommy gently on the couch. "Now!" My mother arrived home to find our house swarming with police officers. Tommy and I were seated in the living room, wrapped in blankets neither of us needed, answering questions from a detective who specialized in child abduction cases. Tommy couldn't provide much information as the man had grabbed him from behind, covering his mouth before he could scream. He'd been trying to drag Tommy to a van parked in the alley when I'd intervened. The police searched the area thoroughly, even bringing in dogs to track the man's scent, but he'd vanished. They found blood in the alley from what was likely a broken nose, and collected it for DNA evidence. The van Tommy described was found abandoned 2 miles away, reported stolen earlier that day. Inside, they discovered rope, duct tape, and children's toys, a kit that made every adult in the room go pale. My mother held Tommy and me so tight that night I thought she might never let go. She cried in a way I'd never seen before, great sobbing gasps that shook her entire body. "You saved him," she kept repeating to me. "You saved your brother." The police increased patrols in our neighborhood for months afterward, and every parent instituted new, stricter rules about playing outside. Tommy didn't go anywhere alone for years, and even now, as a teenager himself, he still texts constantly when he's out, letting us know he's safe. Grandmother's house. The summer I turned 16, my father's job required him to travel extensively, leaving my mother and me to fill the long, humid days of July however we could. It was during one particularly sweltering morning that my mother suggested we visit my grandmother, her mother, who lived in a rural area about 3 hours from our suburban home. I hadn't seen Grandma in almost a year, and the guilt of that neglect combined with the promise of her legendary cooking made the decision easy. The drive to Grandmother's house was like traveling backward through time. The smooth highways gradually gave way to winding 2-lane roads, then to barely paved paths that twisted through farmland and forest. The final approach to her property required turning onto an unpaved road so narrow that tree branches scraped both sides of our car, creating an eerie symphony of scratches and whispers. Grandmother's house sat like an island in a sea of rice paddies, a traditional structure that had been in our family for generations. The wooden exterior had weathered to a soft grey, and the tiled roof curved elegantly against the sky. Despite its isolation, the house had been modernized over the years with electricity, running water, and even internet, thanks to my Uncle Hiroshi, who lived with Grandmother and worked in IT at the nearby town. "My darling!" Grandmother exclaimed when we arrived, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of jasmine tea and the subtle incense she always burned at the family altar. At 73, she moved with surprising agility, her silver hair pinned back in an elegant bun that hadn't changed style in all my years of knowing her. Uncle Hiroshi emerged from his room to greet us, looking every bit the stereotype of a tech worker with his thick-rimmed glasses and slight stoop from hours hunched over computers. His room, I knew from experience, was a paradise of gaming equipment, multiple monitors, and the latest technology that seemed impossibly out of place in this rural setting. "Still playing that shooting game?" he asked me with a knowing smile, referring to our shared obsession with Doom 3, which had just released its expansion pack. "Every chance I get," I admitted, already anticipating hours of uninterrupted gaming on his superior setup. The afternoon passed pleasantly with family chatter, Grandmother's incredible lunch of homemade sushi and tempura, and stories of local gossip that my mother absorbed with the attention of someone starved for hometown news. As evening approached, Grandmother announced she needed groceries for tomorrow's meals, and Uncle Hiroshi offered to drive. "We'll all go," my mother decided, gathering her purse. "It'll be nice to see how the town has changed." I started to follow, but Uncle Hiroshi stopped me with a wink. "Someone should stay and guard the house," he said loudly, then whispered, "New graphics card. Doom never looked better." I tried to contain my excitement as they piled into Uncle's car, waving enthusiastically as they disappeared down the narrow road. The moment they were out of sight, I practically ran to his room, powering up his gaming rig with practiced efficiency. The game absorbed me completely. The enhanced graphics made every shadow more menacing, every monster more terrifying. I played with headphones on, the surround sound creating an immersive experience that made me jump at every virtual noise. Time ceased to exist as I battled through Mars' demon-infested facilities, so engrossed that I didn't notice the real world growing dark outside. The phone rang at exactly 8:47 p.m., the landline's shrill tone cutting through my game-induced trance. It was Uncle Hiroshi, and I could hear irritation in his voice mixed with the sound of rain that had started falling. "We've got a flat tire," he explained, the connection crackling with static, "just after the turn onto the main road. I've got the spare, but I need the tire iron. I forgot to put it back after rotating the tires last week. It's in the storage shed." The storage shed stood about 30 feet from the main house, a wooden structure that housed tools, seasonal decorations, and various items accumulated over decades. Finding the tire iron in daylight would have been challenging enough, but in the dark, it would be nearly impossible without a flashlight. "Can you bring it?" Uncle continued. "We're right at the turnoff. You know the spot where the road meets the paved street. Just walk straight down our road and you'll see the car's hazard lights." I wanted to say no. Every fiber of my being resisted the idea of walking that dark, narrow road alone. But I could hear grandmother in the background, worried about being stranded, and my mother's voice asking if everything was okay. At 16, I couldn't admit to being afraid of the dark, especially not to Uncle Hiroshi, who treated me like an equal, an adult. "I'll be right there," I heard myself say, already regretting it. The storage shed was a maze of shadows and cobwebs, but I found the tire iron after several minutes of searching, my phone's weak light barely penetrating the gloom. The tool was heavier than expected, solid metal that felt reassuring in my grip. I started down the road, trying to ignore how quickly the house's lights faded behind me. The unpaved road at night was a different entity entirely from its daytime self. The packed dirt that seemed firm in sunlight became treacherous in darkness, full of invisible holes and loose stones that threatened to turn my ankle with every step. The rice paddies on either side reflected the sliver of moon when clouds permitted, creating an ethereal landscape that was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The forest sections were worse. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches forming a canopy that blocked even the meager moonlight. Strange sounds emanated from the darkness, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, the occasional animal cry that made my heart race. I walked faster, then slower, then faster again, unable to find a pace that felt safe. 20 minutes into my journey, I could finally see the car's hazard lights blinking in the distance, twin amber beacons that promised safety and family. But as I continued walking, something appeared in the road ahead, between me and those welcoming lights. At first, I thought it was a large rock or perhaps a bag of garbage someone had illegally dumped. But as I drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made my blood freeze. An elderly woman sat in the middle of the road, her legs folded beneath her in a position that looked uncomfortable, even painful. Her face was turned toward the rice paddy, mouth hanging open as if she were trying to catch raindrops that weren't falling. Her hair, long and unkempt, hung in grey straggles around her face, and her clothes looked ancient, like something from historical photographs of rural Japan. I stopped walking, every instinct screaming that something was profoundly wrong with this scene. The woman didn't acknowledge my presence, didn't move except for the slight swaying of her upper body, like wheat in a breeze I couldn't feel. The tire iron in my hand suddenly felt less like a tool and more like a weapon, though what use it would be against whatever this was, I couldn't imagine. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice cracking like I was 13 again. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. She continued staring at the rice paddy, that horrible slack-jawed expression unchanged. I took a step closer, then another, driven by equal parts concern and morbid curiosity. Maybe she was ill, having a stroke, needed medical attention. The rational part of my brain, the part raised on science and logic, insisted there had to be a normal explanation. "Ma'am," I tried again, louder this time. "Can you hear me?" Her head turned toward me with a motion too smooth, too mechanical to be natural. Her eyes were completely white, not blind white, but white like fresh snow, like nothing existed behind them. The wrinkles on her face seemed to shift and writhe in the dim light, and her mouth, still hanging open, began to emit a sound that wasn't quite breathing, wasn't quite moaning, but something in between. That's when I noticed her body properly for the first time. What I had taken for a seated position was something else entirely. She had no legs. Her torso ended at the waist, and she was supporting herself on two arms that were far too long, too jointed, like they had extra elbows that bent in directions arms shouldn't bend. She started moving toward me, using those horrible arms to drag herself across the dirt road with surprising speed. The sound it made, a wet sliding mixed with a scratch of fingernails on earth, unlocked a primitive terror I didn't know existed. I ran, clutching the tire iron, my eyes squeezed shut as if not seeing would make it not real. I must have passed her, must have run right by that thing pretending to be human, because suddenly the car's lights were bright in my face, and Uncle Hiroshi was catching me as I stumbled and fell. They told me later that I was babbling incoherently about an old woman with no legs, that I was shaking so badly they thought I was having a seizure. They put me in the car while Uncle changed the tire, my mother holding me like she had when I was small and woke from nightmares. When we drove back, all of us cramped in the vehicle rather than leave anyone to walk. The road was empty. No old woman. No sign anything had ever been there except my own footprints in the dirt. Grandmother made me special tea when we got home, something bitter that she said would calm the spirits. She listened to my story without the skepticism I expected, nodding seriously at certain details. "The road has always been strange at night," she said finally. "My grandmother told stories of things that lived between the rice paddies and the forest, things that weren't quite human anymore. You were brave to help your uncle, but perhaps next time, we all go together, yes." I spent the rest of that visit sleeping on a futon in the main room, unable to be alone even in Uncle Hiroshi's gaming paradise. He never teased me about it, never brought up how I'd acted that night. Sometimes, when we were gaming together, he'd mention casually that he'd installed better lights along the road, that he never let grandmother walk it alone after dark. The haunted house. 3 years after the incident at grandmother's house, I was 19 and living on my own for the first time. College had brought me to a new city, and the apartment I'd been renting with roommates had become unbearable due to their constant partying. When I found the listing for a small house at an impossibly low rent, I jumped at the chance for privacy and quiet. The house sat on the edge of the historic district, a Victorian-era structure that had been converted into a rental property decades ago. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, seemed almost eager to rent it to me, barely checking my references before handing over the keys. "It has character," he'd said, which I would later understand was code for "something is definitely wrong with this place." My 3-year-old son from a relationship that had ended badly was with me every other weekend, and I was determined to make this house a real home for him. Oliver was at that age where imagination ruled everything, where cardboard boxes became spaceships and blanket forts were impenetrable castles. I thought the old house with its creaky floors and mysterious corners would be perfect for his adventures. The first sign something was off came from my friend Jessica, who helped me move in. She was carrying a box of kitchen supplies when she suddenly froze in the doorway of the living room, her face draining of color as she stared at something in the corner. "What's wrong?" I asked, following her gaze but seeing nothing except peeling wallpaper and a water stain on the ceiling. "We need to leave," she said, setting the box down with shaking hands. "This house. There's something wrong here." I pressed her for details, but she refused to elaborate, practically running to her car and speeding away. She never visited again, always finding excuses when I invited her over, and our friendship gradually faded because of it. The house was indeed darker than it should have been. Even with all the curtains open and lights on, shadows seemed to pool in corners and stretch across floors in defiance of physics. The temperature was consistently 5 to 10 degrees cooler inside than out, which I initially attributed to old insulation and drafty windows. Oliver noticed things before I did. During his first visit, he stood in the bathroom doorway and asked, "Who's the old lady?" My blood chilled. "What old lady, buddy?" "The one in the bathtub," he said matter-of-factly, as if this were completely normal. "She's all wet." I checked the bathroom thoroughly, finding nothing but an antique clawfoot tub that had probably been there since the house was built. I told myself he was imagining things, that 3-year-old saw things that weren't there all the time. But I started leaving that bathroom door closed. The framed photograph incident happened on a Tuesday morning. I was running late for work, had just grabbed my coffee, and was heading for the door when I realized I'd forgotten my laptop charger. I rushed back inside, and the moment I crossed the threshold, a family photograph flew off the wall with such force it shattered against the opposite wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. The photograph hadn't fallen as it would if the nail had given way. It had shot horizontally across the room, as if thrown by invisible hands. I stood frozen, coffee spilling from my trembling mug, trying to rationalize what I'd just witnessed. Wind, structural settling, elaborate prank. Nothing made sense. After 6 months of increasingly disturbing events, doors opening and closing on their own, voices whispering from empty rooms, objects moving when no one was watching, I discovered the hidden basement. I'd been repairing loose boards on the back deck when I noticed the square cut into the planking. There was no handle, no obvious way to open it, but curiosity and perhaps something else compelled me to pry it open with a crowbar. The smell that wafted up was earth and age and something else, something organic and wrong. A ladder, surprisingly sturdy despite its apparent age, descended into darkness. I should have called someone, should have at least waited until daylight, but instead I grabbed a flashlight and climbed down. The basement wasn't a basement at all, but rather a cave carved from raw earth. The walls were packed dirt, no support beams, no concrete, just a hollow space that shouldn't have been able to exist without collapsing. My flashlight beam swept across the empty space until it landed on something in the far corner. It was a gravestone, or something like one. Rough carved granite with symbols I couldn't read, though they looked old, older than the house above. The stone was cracked down the middle, as if something had forced its way out from beneath. The earth around it was disturbed, not recently, but in a way that suggested something had happened here, something that had left a permanent scar on this place. As I stood there, transfixed by the stone, insects began dropping from the earthen ceiling. Not normal insects, but things with too many legs, bodies that seemed to shift and change in the flashlight beam. They landed on my arms, my neck, my face, and I felt them trying to burrow into my skin. I scrambled up the ladder, slamming the trapdoor behind me, and spent the next hour in the shower, scrubbing my skin raw. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I was lying in bed, exhausted from another sleepless night of unexplained noises, when I heard footsteps in my room. Clear, deliberate footsteps walking from the door to my bed. I lay perfectly still, every muscle tensed, as the footsteps stopped right beside me. Then I felt it. 2 hands, pressed flat against my back. Not threatening, not violent, just there. Cold, impossibly cold, like being touched by winter itself. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even close my eyes. The hands remained for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, then lifted away. The footsteps retreated, and I heard my bedroom door close even though I could see it remained open. I turned on every light in the house and called Oliver's mother. "Keep him this weekend," I said. "I'm moving." I stayed in a motel for the next week while I found a new apartment, returning to the house only during daylight hours to pack. Mr. Peterson didn't argue when I broke the lease, didn't even keep my security deposit. He just nodded knowingly and took the keys back with what looked like relief. I drove by the house a year later, curious despite myself. It was still empty, a "for rent" sign fading in the window. The price, I noticed, was even lower than what I'd paid. I wondered how many others had experienced what I had. How many had fled in the night, leaving behind belongings they were too frightened to retrieve. The basement apartment. The summer after graduating college, I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I found the basement apartment listing. 22 years old with student loans crushing my finances, the below-market rent seemed like a gift from the universe. The landlady, Mrs. Chen, was a tiny woman in her 80s who lived in the main house above, and she seemed delighted to have what she called a responsible young person taking the space. The apartment was accessed through a separate entrance at the side of the house, down a narrow concrete staircase that descended 8 feet below ground level. The moment I first walked down those steps, something felt off. The temperature dropped dramatically, which I initially attributed to being underground, but there was something else too, a heaviness in the air that made each breath feel labored, like the atmosphere itself was thicker down there. The space itself was surprisingly large, with a living room, kitchenette, bedroom, and full bathroom. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, Mrs. Chen explained, leaving behind several pieces of furniture that she said I could keep or discard as I wished. There was an old leather couch that had seen better days, a solid oak bookshelf, and oddly, a large mirror mounted on the living room wall that seemed impossible to remove, its frame somehow embedded into the concrete itself. "That mirror been here since before I buy house," Mrs. Chan told me in her broken English, noticing my attempts to examine its mounting. 40 year, maybe more. Previous owner say it load-bearing, important for structure. Better not to move. The idea of a load-bearing mirror was absurd, but the rent was too good to pass up over such a minor oddity. I signed the lease that afternoon and moved in the following weekend, eager to start my independent adult life, even if it was 8 feet underground. The first few weeks were relatively normal. I started my new job at a marketing firm downtown, established a routine of work, gym, and Netflix, and slowly decorated the space to make it feel more like home. I hung posters over the dark wood paneling, added bright throw pillows to combat the perpetual dimness, and invested in several lamps since the overhead lighting was woefully inadequate. The scratching sounds started in my 3rd week there. Late at night, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., I'd wake to what sounded like fingernails dragging across wood. The sound seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, moving slowly from one corner of the apartment to another. I assumed it was mice or maybe rats, though the scratching sounded too deliberate, too rhythmic to be random rodent activity. I mentioned it to Mrs. Chen, who promised to call an exterminator, but when the pest control guy came, he found no evidence of infestation. No droppings, no gnaw marks, no entry points where rodents could access the walls. He set traps anyway, which remained untouched for weeks while the scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent each night. Then came the mirror incidents. I'd walk past it and catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow or shape that didn't match my own reflection. When I'd turn to look directly, everything appeared normal, just my tired face staring back. But sometimes, for just a fraction of a second, I swear my reflection's expression didn't match my own. I'd be frowning, and it would be smiling. I'd turn away, and it would still be watching. One night, after a particularly stressful day at work, I came home to find all my furniture moved. Not dramatically, just shifted a few inches from where I'd left everything. The couch was pulled away from the wall, the coffee table rotated slightly, chairs repositioned. Nothing was damaged or missing, just moved, as if someone had been searching for something underneath or behind each piece. I called Mrs. Chen immediately, asking if she'd been in the apartment, if maintenance had been done without notice. She insisted no one had been there, that she'd been home all day and would have seen anyone approaching my entrance. She suggested, with what seemed like forced casualness, that maybe I'd moved things myself and forgotten, that the stress of a new job could cause memory lapses. The next morning, I installed a security camera, one of those smart home devices that sends alerts to your phone when it detects motion. I positioned it to cover both the entrance and most of the living room, including that unsettling mirror. For several days, it recorded nothing unusual, just me coming and going, the occasional spider crossing its field of view. Then, on a Thursday night, My phone erupted with notifications while I was at the gym. Motion detected. Motion detected. Motion detected. The alerts came so fast they blurred together. I opened the app with shaking hands, expecting to see an intruder, but the live feed showed my empty apartment. Nothing moving, nothing out of place. I scrolled back through the recorded clips, and my blood turned to ice. In each video, lasting just a few seconds, there was movement in the mirror. Not reflections of something in the room, but movement within the mirror itself. Shadowy figures walking past. Shapes that had no corresponding presence in my actual apartment. In one particularly clear clip, I could see what looked like a face pressed against the inside of the glass. Features distorted as if pushing through plastic wrap. Mouth open in what might have been a scream or plea for help. I left the gym immediately, but couldn't bring myself to go home. Instead, I sat in my car in the parking lot, watching the live feed, waiting for something else to happen. Around midnight, the scratching sound started again, loud enough to be picked up by the camera's microphone. But this time, I could see the source. The sounds were coming from inside the mirror, as if something was clawing at the glass from the other side, trying to break through. I stayed in a hotel that night, and the next day, I confronted Mrs. Chen with the footage. Her face went pale as she watched, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked every one of her 80+ years. She was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Previous tenant, he see things too," she finally admitted. "And one before that. But I need rental income, you understand? My husband passed, left me with mortgage, taxes. I cannot afford empty apartment." "What happened to them?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "First one, she disappear. Police say she run away, but she leave everything, even purse and keys. Second one, he." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He break mirror, try to destroy it with hammer. The sound it make when it break, like screaming, many voices screaming. And behind mirror. What was behind it?" I prompted when she fell silent. "Wall," she said simply. "Just wall. But wall that should not be there. Blueprint for house showroom behind mirror. Another room same size as your living room. But when mirror break, only solid concrete. Previous tenant, he go crazy after that. Hospital for mind, they take him. Mirror fix itself by next morning, like nothing happened. I moved out that weekend, forfeiting my security deposit and not carrying. But before I left, curiosity got the better of me, and I did some research on the house's history. What I found chilled me more than any scratching sound or impossible reflection. In 1943, the original owner, a doctor named Harrison Blackwood, had been investigated for the disappearances of several patients. The investigation revealed he'd been conducting experiments in the basement, trying to prove his theory about parallel dimensions and the spaces between worlds. He claimed he'd found a way to create a window between realities, but the window worked both ways. Things from the other side could look through, and sometimes, if the conditions were right, they could cross over. Dr. Blackwood disappeared one night, along with his research and several patients who'd been staying at his makeshift facility. The house was sold, renovated, and that basement room was sealed off, except, apparently, for the mirror that served as Blackwood's window, which somehow remained, embedded in what had become a solid wall, still functioning as a portal to somewhere else. I drove by the house last month, 5 years after my escape. There was a new "for rent" sign in the window of the basement apartment. The price was even lower than what I'd paid. I thought about warning potential tenants, but who would believe such a story? Instead, I watched from my car as a young couple, probably fresh out of college like I'd been, walked down those concrete steps with Mrs. Chen for a viewing. They emerged 20 minutes later, smiling and nodding, clearly charmed by the space and the price. The girl was already talking about where they'd put their furniture, how they'd decorate. I wanted to scream at them to run, but I just sat there, paralyzed by the certainty that they wouldn't listen, that the cycle would continue, that the mirror would keep watching and waiting for whatever conditions would finally allow those things on the other side to break through. The night shift. Working hospital security wasn't my dream job, but at 25, with rent to pay and limited options, I took what I could get. Riverside General was an aging facility on the outskirts of the city, perpetually understaffed and underfunded, serving mainly low-income patients who had nowhere else to go. The night shift paid an extra $2 an hour, and since I've always been a night owl, I figured it would be easy money. My training partner was Rodrigo, a veteran guard who'd worked at Riverside for 15 years. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4" and built like a linebacker, but I noticed he always carried a rosary in his pocket and crossed himself whenever we passed the hospital's chapel. On my first night, he gave me advice that seemed strange at the time but would prove invaluable later. "Listen carefully," he said, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by deadly seriousness. "This place, it's different at night. You follow the rules I tell you, and you'll be fine. Break them, and I can't help you." The rules, as he explained them, were specific and non-negotiable. Never patrol the 4th floor alone after 3 a.m. Always knock before entering the morgue, even though no living person should be there. If you hear a code being called for a room number that doesn't exist, don't respond. Never look directly at the figure in the wheelchair at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. It's been there every night for 10 years, and it's better not to know why. And most importantly, if you encounter a nurse in a vintage uniform from the 1960s, politely excuse yourself and walk away, no matter what she asks you to do. "You're messing with me," I laughed, but Rodrigo's expression didn't change. "I've seen 3 guards quit because they didn't listen," he said. "One ended up in the psychiatric ward upstairs. Still there, actually. Room 318, if you want to visit." He doesn't talk anymore, just stares at the corner of his room and whispers numbers. I thought he was trying to haze the new guy, but I agreed to follow his rules anyway. The first few weeks passed without major incident. The hospital at night was eerily quiet, with long, dimly lit hallways that seemed to stretch forever. The fluorescent lights flickered constantly, creating shadows that danced and shifted in peripheral vision. The old building creaked and groaned, especially during temperature changes, producing sounds that could easily be mistaken for footsteps or doors opening. My primary duties involved checking doors, responding to disturbances, and escorting late-night visitors. The emergency room always had activity, but the upper floors, where long-term patients stayed, were generally peaceful. I made my rounds every 2 hours, checking that exit doors were secure and ensuring no unauthorized persons were in restricted areas. It was during my 4th week that I first encountered something that made me reconsider Rodrigo's warnings. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds on the 3rd floor when I saw it, a figure in a wheelchair at the far end of the hallway, exactly where Rodrigo had said it would be. The hallway was about 100 feet long, and the figure was silhouetted against the window at the end, backlit by streetlights from outside. My first instinct was to approach, to check if a patient needed help, but Rodrigo's warning echoed in my mind. Instead, I continued my rounds, keeping my eyes averted as I passed. But curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced sideways at the figure. It was an elderly man, or what remained of one, dressed in a hospital gown from decades past. His skin was grey, papery, and his eyes tracked my movement despite the fact that his chest showed no signs of breathing. I hurried past, my heart pounding, and when I looked back from the stairwell door, the wheelchair was empty. But I could still feel those eyes watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. The following week brought my encounter with the vintage nurse. I was responding to a call about strange noises in the abandoned wing of the 2nd floor. an area that had been closed for renovations that never happened due to budget cuts. The hallway was dark, with only emergency lighting providing dim illumination. Debris from incomplete construction littered the floor, and plastic sheeting hung from the ceiling like ghosts. She appeared from one of the rooms, stepping into the hallway with practiced grace. Her uniform was pristine white, with a traditional cap that nurses hadn't worn in decades. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with perfectly styled hair and red lipstick that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't place, something vaguely mid-Atlantic. "I need your help with a patient. He's become violent, and I can't restrain him alone." Everything about her screamed wrong. The abandoned wing had no patients, no power to the rooms, no reason for anyone to be there. But she was so convincing, so genuinely distressed, that I almost followed her. Then I remembered Rodrigo's rule. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said, backing away slowly. "I need to radio for backup first. Protocol." Her expression changed instantly, the concern morphing into something hungry and ancient. Her face seemed to flicker, like a TV with bad reception, showing glimpses of something underneath, something decayed and horrible. "You must help me," she insisted, moving closer, and I noticed she wasn't walking but gliding, her feet never quite touching the floor. "He's dying. You have to help me save him." I turned and ran, not caring how it looked, sprinting down the hallway as her voice echoed behind me, changing from pleading to angry to something inhuman that made my skin crawl. When I reached the stairwell and looked back, the hallway was empty, but I could hear her voice coming from every room simultaneously, calling my name, though I'd never told her what it was. The worst night came during a full moon in November. Rodrigo had called in sick, leaving me to patrol alone. I tried to stick to the safe areas, but a fire alarm on the 4th floor forced me to investigate. The alarm was malfunctioning, going off every few minutes, and maintenance wouldn't arrive until morning. I had to check each time to ensure there wasn't an actual fire. It was 3:17 a.m. when I made the mistake of going alone. The 4th floor housed the psychiatric ward and several long-term care patients with severe conditions. The hallway lights were dimmer here, some bulbs completely dead, creating pools of absolute darkness between islands of weak light. As I walked toward the fire alarm panel, I heard it, a wet, dragging sound, like someone pulling a mop across the floor. But the sound was wrong, too organic, too deliberate. I turned the corner and saw something that still appears in my nightmares. It had been human once. That much was clear from the hospital gown and the wristband still attached to what might have been an arm. But its body had been stretched, elongated impossibly, limbs bent at angles that defied anatomy. It was pulling itself along the floor using fingers that had grown to the length of forearms, leaving a trail of something dark and viscous. Its head turned toward me, a motion that involved far too many degrees of rotation, and I saw its face, or what remained of it. The features were smeared, as if someone had taken wet clay and dragged their fingers across it. But the eyes were human, terribly human, and filled with such pain and desperation that I almost stepped forward to help. "Please." It wheezed through a mouth that opened vertically instead of horizontally. "Please, the treatment went wrong. Help me." I backed away, unable to look away from the horror crawling toward me. It moved faster than something that distorted should be able to, closing the distance with frightening speed. I turned to run and collided with someone, a doctor in surgical scrubs with a face mask covering everything but his eyes. "Don't move," he commanded, and something in his voice made me obey. He stepped past me, pulling something from his pocket that looked like a syringe but glowed with a faint blue light. He knelt beside the creature, which had stopped moving, whimpering now like an injured animal. "Sure," the doctor soothed, inserting the syringe into what might have been the thing's neck. "Back to sleep." Back to room 427. The creature's body began to contract, folding in on itself until it resembled something more human, though still wrong in ways I couldn't fully process. The doctor picked it up, carrying it like a child, and walked toward a room that I knew had been empty an hour ago when I'd done my rounds. "You saw nothing," the doctor said without turning back. "Nothing happened here. You were never on this floor tonight." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, and fled. I spent the rest of my shift in the security office, doors locked, watching the monitors but seeing nothing unusual. When morning came and Rodrigo returned, he took one look at my face and knew. "You saw something on 4th, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to form words. "The experiments," he said quietly. "This hospital, it does things. Treatments that aren't approved, aren't legal, aren't natural. The night shift sees it because that's when they think no one's watching. But we're not supposed to see. We're just supposed to guard, to keep people out, or maybe to keep things in." I quit that day, walking out without giving notice, without collecting my final paycheck. But sometimes, on nights when I can't sleep, I think about that creature in the hallway, about the doctor who carried it away, about room 427 and what other impossible things might be behind its door. I think about the wheelchair figure and the vintage nurse, about the rules Rodrigo knew and how he learned them. Mostly, I think about the other security guards who still work there, following rules they don't understand, guarding secrets they're not meant to know, and praying they never encounter something that doesn't follow the rules they've been given. The roadside motel. The divorce had been finalized just 3 days before I found myself driving through the desert, everything I owned packed into my beat-up Honda Civic, heading toward a new job and a new life in Phoenix. At 28, I was starting over with nothing but a teaching position at a community college and the hope that distance would help me forget the last 5 years of my life. The drive from Portland to Phoenix was supposed to take about 20 hours, which I'd planned to split across 2 days with a stop in some forgettable town along the way. But by the time darkness fell on that first day, I'd only made it to the middle of nowhere in Nevada, exhausted from emotional drainage more than physical fatigue. The Desert Palm Motel appeared like a mirage just when I was considering sleeping in my car. A flickering neon sign promised vacancy and cable TV, though half the letters were dead, making it read, "Desert par mm telephone." It was the kind of place that had probably been charming in the 1960s, but now existed in that liminal space between functional and condemned. The office was a small room that reeked of cigarette smoke and mildew. An ancient air conditioner wheezed in the window, providing more noise than cooling. Behind the desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been there since the motel's heyday, her skin leather tough from decades of desert sun, her hair a shade of red that didn't occur in nature. $40 a night, she croaked without looking up from a crossword puzzle. Cash only. Checkouts at 11, but nobody ever stays that long. I should have asked what she meant by that last comment, but I was too tired to care. I paid for one night, took the key attached to a plastic cactus keychain, and drove to room 9 at the far end of the building. The room was exactly what $40 in a desert motel should buy. A sagging bed with a questionable floral bedspread, a TV from the previous century, and a bathroom that featured creative interpretations of standard plumbing. But it was clean enough, and after 8 hours of driving through increasingly desolate landscape, it looked like paradise. I ordered pizza from the only place that delivered to that motel, as the teenager on the phone called it with obvious distaste. While waiting, I showered, trying not to think about the rust-colored water that sputtered from the shower head before running clear. The mirror was cracked in a spider web pattern emanating from the lower right corner, as if someone had punched it, and I avoided looking at my fractured reflection. The pizza arrived, and I ate while watching local news on the fuzzy TV, learning about water shortages and city council elections in a place I'd never visit again. By 10 o'clock, exhaustion overtook me, and I collapsed onto the bed, not bothering to pull back the covers. I woke at exactly 3:33 a.m., according to the digital clock on the nightstand. The room was freezing, my breath visible in the air despite the desert heat that should have kept things warm even at night. But it wasn't the cold that had woken me. It was the sound of breathing that wasn't my own. It came from the corner of the room, near the door, a ragged, wet sound like someone with pneumonia trying to draw air through fluid-filled lungs. I lay perfectly still, eyes straining in the darkness, trying to make out shapes in the corner. The curtains were thin enough that some light from the parking lot filtered through, but the corner remained impenetrably dark. "Hello," I whispered, immediately regretting it. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been, pregnant with malevolent possibility. I reached slowly for the lamp on the nightstand, my hand shaking as I fumbled for the switch. The click was thunderous in the quiet room. Light flooded the space, revealing nothing in the corner but a chair I didn't remember seeing before, its vinyl surface cracked and peeling. But the feeling of being watched, of sharing the room with something hostile, remained. I got up, checking the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed. I was alone, but the cold persisted, and so did the feeling. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled me under again. This time I dreamed, or thought I did. In the dream, I was still in the motel room, but it was different, older, more decrepit. The walls were water-stained, the carpet mouldy, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. A man sat in the corner chair, but his face was obscured by shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like grinding stones. "This room is taken. I paid for it," I heard myself respond. "Not from her," he laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "She can't rent what's already occupied." I woke again, this time to sunlight streaming through the curtains. The clock read 8:17 a.m. The room was normal temperature, the corner empty except for the chair, which I now saw clearly had always been there. I felt foolish about my night terrors, attributing them to stress and exhaustion. I dressed quickly, eager to get back on the road. As I packed my few belongings, I noticed something odd. My suitcase, which I'd left by the door, was now at the foot of the bed. My phone, which I distinctly remembered leaving on the nightstand, was on the bathroom counter. Small things, but unsettling in their implications. At the office, I returned the key to the same woman, who looked like she hadn't moved since the night before. As I turned to leave, she spoke. "You stayed the whole night," she observed, something like surprise in her voice. "Why wouldn't I?" She studied me with eyes that seemed older than her already ancient face. "Room 9 has a history. Most people leave before dawn. Some don't even make it past midnight." "What kind of history?" She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up to join the permanent haze near the ceiling. "Murder-suicide, back in 73. Man killed his wife and kids, then himself. Messy business. Room's been wrong ever since." My blood chilled. "Then why do you rent it out?" "Got to make a living," she shrugged. "Besides, some folks don't mind the company. You must be one of them, staying the whole night." I left without another word, but as I reached my car, something made me look back at room 9. The curtains were open, and I could see inside clearly. The room was different, furniture arranged nothing like how I'd left it, and in the corner, in that chair, I saw a shadow that shouldn't have been there, a shadow shaped like a man, watching me leave. I drove for 3 hours before stopping, my hands shaking the entire time. When I finally pulled into a gas station, I checked my phone for the first time since leaving. There were 17 photos in my gallery that I hadn't taken. They were all of me, sleeping in that motel room, taken from different angles throughout the night. In the last one, time-stamped at 6:43 a.m., Something dark and translucent stood beside my bed, leaning over me. I deleted the photos, but they returned. I factory reset my phone, but they came back. I bought a new phone entirely, and somehow, they appeared in that gallery too. Eventually, I stopped trying to delete them. They serve as a reminder now, proof that some places hold on to their traumas, replaying them endlessly for anyone unfortunate enough to become part of the show. The Craigslist roommate. After 6 months of living alone following the motel incident, my finances demanded I find a roommate for my Phoenix apartment. The 2-bedroom place was nice, but stretching my teacher's salary to its breaking point. I posted on Craigslist, vetted several candidates, and eventually settled on Marcus, a graduate student in his mid-20s who seemed normal, quiet, and capable of paying rent on time. Marcus moved in on a Saturday, bringing surprisingly few possessions for someone his age. Just 2 suitcases, a laptop bag, and 3 identical boxes sealed with excessive amounts of tape. He was polite but distant, offering minimal information about himself beyond his studies in anthropology at the university. "I keep unusual hours," he warned as we signed the roommate agreement. "Research and writing, you know. I hope that won't be a problem." I assured him it wouldn't be. After years of insomnia and night terrors from my various encounters, I rarely slept well anyway. A quiet roommate who kept to himself sounded perfect. The first month was uneventful. Marcus was the ideal roommate, clean, quiet, always paid his share of utilities on time. He spent most of his time in his room, emerging only to use the kitchen or bathroom. Sometimes I'd hear him typing late into the night, occasionally speaking in low tones on the phone in what sounded like Latin or some other dead language. The strange incidents began gradually. I'd wake up to find the living room furniture slightly rearranged, pulled into a rough circle. Marcus always denied moving anything, suggesting I might be sleepwalking. Then came the smell, a combination of sulfur and something organic, like rotting flowers, that would permeate the apartment for hours before disappearing completely. One night, I woke to chanting coming from Marcus's room. It was rhythmic, hypnotic, in a language that hurt to listen to, as if the words themselves were wrong for human throats to speak. I lay in bed, paralyzed by an inexplicable dread, until the chanting stopped abruptly at exactly 3 a.m. The next morning, Marcus emerged looking haggard, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. "Sorry if I was loud," he said, pouring coffee with shaking hands. "Practice presentation for my thesis defense. Ancient ritualistic practices in pre-Columbian societies." I accepted his explanation, but doubt gnawed at me. I started paying closer attention to his behavior, noting patterns that didn't add up. He never ate meat, not unusual in itself, but he seemed physically repulsed by it, leaving the room if I cooked anything containing animal products. He covered every mirror in his room with black cloth, claiming the reflections distracted him from his studies. And once, I swear I saw him standing in the hallway at 4 a.m., completely motionless, facing the wall like he was in a trance. The breaking point came 3 months after he moved in. I'd gone to bed early with a migraine, the kind that made light feel like needles in my brain. Around midnight, I woke to voices in the living room, multiple voices speaking in that same painful language I'd heard from Marcus's room. I crept to my door, opening it a crack to peer into the hallway. The living room was lit by candles arranged in a complex pattern on the floor, their flickering light casting writhing shadows on the walls. Marcus stood in the center, wearing robes I'd never seen before, reading from a book that looked ancient, its leather binding cracked and stained. But he wasn't alone. 4 other figures stood at points around the room, also robed, their faces hidden by deep hoods. They swayed in unison, their voices joining Marcus's in a crescendo that made my teeth ache. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against my eardrums, and I noticed with growing horror that the shadows on the walls weren't following the natural movement of the candlelight. They were moving independently, reaching toward the center of the circle where something was beginning to form. It started as a distortion, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, but it quickly solidified into something that shouldn't exist. It had too many angles, hurt to look at directly, as if my brain couldn't process its geometry. Tentacles, or what my mind interpreted as tentacles, emerged from the mass, probing the air like a blind creature learning its surroundings. Marcus raised his voice, his words becoming commands rather than chants, and the thing in the circle pulsed, growing larger with each syllable. One of the other figures stepped forward, pulling something from their robes, a small animal, a cat from the neighborhood I recognized, and I knew with horrible certainty what was about to happen. I must have made a sound, a gasp or whimper, because Marcus's head snapped toward my door. His eyes, when they met mine through the crack, weren't human anymore. They were black, completely black, like looking into deep space. "You shouldn't be watching," he said, his voice carrying despite the distance, despite the chanting that continued from the others. "Go back to sleep. Forget what you see." But I couldn't move, couldn't look away as the thing in the circle reached for the cat with appendages that phased in and out of existence. The moment it made contact, the cat didn't scream. It simply ceased, not dying but unmaking, dissolving into nothing as if it had never existed at all. The entity grew more solid, more present, and I realized with dawning horror that they were bringing something through, summoning it from wherever such things existed. And once it was fully here, once it was solid and real in our world, I had no idea what it would do or what they intended to do with it. Survival instinct finally overrode paralysis. I grabbed my phone, my keys, didn't bother with shoes, and ran. I burst through my bedroom door, sprinted past the living room without looking, and was out the apartment door before anyone could react. I heard Marcus call my name, heard footsteps following, but I didn't stop. I drove to a 24-hour diner and called the police, reporting a break-in at my apartment. When they arrived, they found nothing, no candles, no robed figures, no trace of anything unusual except Marcus, who claimed I'd had a psychotic break, that I'd been acting strangely for weeks. He had documentation, fabricated emails and text messages showing my supposed deteriorating mental state, concerns he'd allegedly expressed to mutual acquaintances I didn't know we had. The police believed him. Why wouldn't they? He was calm, articulate, concerned for my well-being. I was barefoot, shaking, ranting about impossible geometries and dissolved cats. I never went back to the apartment. I forfeited my security deposit, abandoned most of my possessions, and moved in with a colleague until I could find new housing. Marcus sent me several messages, expressing concern, offering to pack my things, suggesting I seek professional help. I blocked his number, but sometimes, late at night, I still receive calls from unknown numbers where all I hear is that terrible chanting. I researched him afterward, tried to find out who he really was. The university had no record of a graduate student by his name. The references he'd provided were disconnected numbers. The ID he'd shown me was probably fake. I have no idea who or what I'd been living with for 3 months, what he'd been summoning in my living room, or what happened to the thing they'd brought through. But sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I see angles that shouldn't exist, geometry that makes no sense, and I know that whatever they summoned that night, it's still here, still in our world, doing whatever it was brought here to do. The final departure. It was 3 years after the Craigslist roommate incident when my life finally reached a breaking point. 31 years old, traumatized by experiences that no therapist would believe, unable to maintain relationships or hold steady employment due to chronic insomnia and paranoia, I decided to end it all. Not through violence or dramatic gesture, but by simply walking into the desert and not coming back. I'd been living in a small town on the edge of the Mojave, working part-time at a bookstore, barely existing rather than living. The decision came on a particularly bad night, when the shadows in my apartment seemed to move with purpose, and whispers in languages that shouldn't exist echoed from the walls. I packed a backpack with water and a few supplies, more out of habit than any intention to use them, and drove to a trailhead I discovered months earlier. The trail led into a canyon system that branched into a maze of red rock and sand. I'd read about hikers getting lost here, their bodies found days or weeks later, mummified by the dry heat. It seemed like a peaceful way to go, just walking until exhaustion took over, then lying down and letting the desert claim me. No violence, no mess for someone to clean up, just a gradual fading into the landscape. I started hiking at dawn, the air still cool before the desert heat took hold. The trail was well marked at first, but I deliberately took unmarked turns, scrambling over rocks and through narrow passages, ensuring I couldn't find my way back even if I changed my mind. By noon, I was thoroughly lost, which had been the plan all along. The sun was brutal, sapping moisture from my body faster than I could replace it. I'd brought water, but had no intention of rationing it carefully. I drank when thirsty, knowing that when it ran out, the end would come quicker. The landscape became increasingly surreal as dehydration set in, red rocks seeming to pulse with their own heartbeat, shadows moving in ways that defied the sun's position. By late afternoon, I'd reached a box canyon, walls too steep to climb, no way forward except back the way I'd come. It seemed like the perfect place to stop. I sat in the shade of an overhanging rock, finished the last of my water, and waited for whatever came next. That's when I saw the cave entrance, partially hidden behind a fall of rocks. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but something about it called to me. Perhaps it was the cool air flowing from within, or maybe the part of me that still clung to curiosity despite everything. I squeezed through the opening, finding myself in a larger chamber that extended back into darkness. The temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly, blessed relief from the desert heat. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed the walls weren't natural rock. They were covered in carvings, symbols that looked ancient but also impossibly complex, mathematical in their precision. The ceiling stretched up beyond the reach of sunlight, disappearing into blackness that seemed solid, tangible. I should have been afraid, should have recognized this as another horror to add to my collection, but I felt oddly calm. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, providing just enough light to see by as I ventured deeper into the cave. The passage wound downward, spiraling into the earth like a massive drill hole. Time became meaningless in that descent. I might have walked for hours or days. I didn't hunger, didn't thirst, didn't tire. The symbols on the walls changed as I descended, becoming more complex, more beautiful in their alien geometry. They told a story, I realized, though not in any language meant for human understanding. Eventually, the passage opened into a vast chamber, so large I couldn't see the far walls or ceiling. In the center sat a figure on what might have been a throne carved from black stone that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The figure was humanoid but wrong, too tall, too thin, with too many joints in its limbs. Its face was hidden beneath a hood that seemed to be made of the same light-absorbing material as the throne. "You've had quite the journey," it said, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "Not just today, but throughout your life. You've seen things most humans never encounter, survived experiences that should have broken you." "They did break me," I replied, surprised I could speak, surprised I wasn't terrified. "That's why I'm here." "No," the figure corrected, leaning forward slightly. "They transformed you. Each encounter, each horror you've faced, has been preparing you for this moment." Preparing me for what? Death. What might have been laughter echoed through the chamber, though it sounded more like wind chimes made of bone. Death. Oh, you've misunderstood everything. You're not here to die. You're here to choose. The figure gestured, and the walls of the chamber lit up with images, memories, but not just mine. I saw the hotel in Turkey, but from the perspective of the predator who tried to break into our room. I felt his hunger, his compulsion, but also the invisible chains that bound him to replay that hunt eternally, prevented from ever succeeding by forces he couldn't comprehend. I saw the grandmother's house, the thing on the road that had no legs, and understood it wasn't trying to hurt me but to warn me. It had once been human, transformed by exposure to places where reality was thin, doomed to exist between worlds, trying desperately to keep others from suffering the same fate. The haunted house, the hospital, the motel, the roommate's ritual, all of it played out before me with new context. These weren't random encounters with the supernatural. They were tests, evaluations, a gradual exposure to the truth that reality was far more complex and layered than most humans could perceive. Every generation, the figure explained, a few humans develop the ability to see beyond the veil, to perceive the true nature of existence. Most go mad. Some become problems that need to be managed. But a rare few, those who survive with their sanity mostly intact, are offered a choice. What choice? I asked, though part of me already knew. To become a guardian, a shepherd of the boundary between worlds. Someone who ensures that the things that shouldn't cross over don't, and that humans who stumble too close to the truth are either guided away or, if necessary, helped to forget. The figure stood, its height impossible, its form shifting in ways that hurt to perceive directly. You've been seeing us your whole life, you know. The nurse in the hospital, the doctor who carried away that transformed patient, even the landlady at the motel. All guardians, all working to maintain the balance. The balance of what? Between ignorance and knowledge, between safety and truth. Humanity isn't ready to know what shares their reality. Maybe they never will be. But without guardians, the boundaries weaken, things leak through, and incidents like what your roommate was attempting become successful. I thought about my life, the constant fear, the isolation, the inability to connect with normal people who hadn't seen what I'd seen. Then I thought about others who might stumble into these situations unprepared, unwarned, unprotected. If I say yes, what happens? You change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. You'll develop abilities that help you perform your duties. You'll be able to sense when reality is thin, when something is trying to break through. You'll know how to strengthen boundaries, how to guide the lost, how to make people forget when necessary. And if I say no, you walk back out into the desert. Your body will be found in a few days. The official cause of death will be dehydration and exposure. You'll be mourned briefly by the few who knew you, then forgotten. The experiences you've had will die with you, and someone else will eventually take your place, though they might not survive the training you've endured. I stood in that impossible chamber, weighing my options. Death seemed peaceful compared to a lifetime of managing horrors. But then I remembered the 10-year-old boy I'd been, terrified in that hotel bathroom, saved only by luck and quick thinking. I remembered all the others who might not be so lucky. I accept, I said, the words feeling like they were pulled from deep within me. The figure nodded, pushing back its hood to reveal a face that was almost human but not quite, features that shifted between comforting and terrible. Welcome to the truth behind the truth. Your training begins now. What followed was months, maybe years, of learning in that place outside normal space and time. I learned about the layers of reality, the things that existed in the spaces between, the ancient agreements that kept the world separate. I learned to see the signs of boundary weaknesses, to recognize when someone had been touched by the other side, to manipulate memory and perception when necessary. When I finally emerged from the cave, only a day had passed in the real world. My car was still at the trailhead, covered in a fine layer of dust. I looked the same in the mirror, but I could see the difference in my eyes, a depth that hadn't been there before, a knowledge that couldn't be unlearned. I returned to society with a new purpose. I took a job as a night security guard at a hospital, one with a reputation for strange occurrences. I guided new guards away from the dangerous areas, ensured certain doors stayed locked, and occasionally dealt with things that tried to cross over. I became friends with other guardians, a secret network of people who'd seen too much and chosen to protect those who hadn't. Sometimes I encounter people like I used to be, traumatized by brushes with the impossible. I help them when I can, guide them toward forgetting when necessary, and occasionally, very rarely, I identify someone who might be strong enough to join us. The recruiting process is long and careful, usually taking years of gradual exposure, but it's necessary to maintain our numbers. I think about that day in the desert often, about the choice I made. It wasn't the ending I'd planned, but perhaps it was the one I'd been moving toward my entire life. Every horror I'd faced had been preparing me for this role, transforming me from victim to guardian, from hunted to protector. The shadows still move when they shouldn't, whispers still echo in dead languages, and things still try to break through from places that shouldn't exist. But now, instead of running, I stand between them and the unaware world, holding the line, maintaining the balance, ensuring that most people can sleep peacefully, never knowing how close they come to truths that would shatter their understanding of reality. It's not an easy life, but it's a purposeful one. And sometimes, when I successfully prevent something terrible from crossing over, when I guide a lost soul back to safety, when I help someone forget a truth too terrible to live with, I know I made the right choice in that impossible chamber beneath the desert. The darkness is still there, will always be there, pressing against the boundaries of our world. But now I'm part of the force that pushes back, that maintains the separation, that ensures the morning always comes, even if most people never know how close it came to not arriving at all. The weight of knowledge. These 5 additional encounters, these moments where the veil lifted and showed me glimpses of what lurks beyond ordinary perception, have become the foundation of my current existence. Each story represents a step in a journey I didn't know I was taking, a gradual initiation into truths that most humans are blessed to never discover. The basement apartment with its mirror to another realm taught me that some objects are conduits, windows or doors to places that shouldn't be accessible. Now, as a guardian, I know how to identify these objects, how to seal them when possible, or at least warn others away. Mrs. Chen still rents that apartment, but now she has my number, calls me when tenants report problems, and I arrive to reinforce the barriers that keep the mirror merely reflective rather than permeable. The hospital night shift revealed an entire shadow infrastructure of medical experimentation, treatments that push the boundaries of human physiology and sometimes push too far. These facilities exist in every major city, hidden in plain sight, conducting research that conventional science wouldn't dare attempt. As guardians, we monitor these places, ensuring that what they create doesn't escape, that their failures are contained, that the successful experiments don't upset the delicate balance of what humanity accepts as possible. The roadside motel and others like it are scars on reality, places where traumatic events have worn the boundaries thin. They're not traditionally haunted but something worse, recordings that can pull the living into their endless loop, making them participants in historical horrors. Part of my job now involves visiting these places, performing rituals that strengthen the boundaries, ensuring the past stays in the past, even when it desperately wants to bleed into the present. The Craigslist roommate situation opened my eyes to the active threats, the people and entities deliberately trying to breach the boundaries for their own purposes. Marcus, whoever or whatever he really was, represents a faction that believes humanity is ready for revelation, that the walls between worlds should come down. We Guardians constantly work against such groups, disrupting their rituals, banishing what they summon, and cleaning up the aftermath of their attempts to force enlightenment on an unprepared species. And the final departure, my walk into the desert that became a recruitment rather than a suicide, showed me that even the darkest moments can be transformative. The entity in that underground chamber, which I now know as the Architect, one of the original builders of the boundaries, saw in me what I couldn't see in myself, the potential to be a protector rather than a victim. Now, 5 years into my role as a guardian, I understand that every person who experiences the paranormal is faced with a choice. Even if they don't realize it, they can let the experience break them, driving them to madness or death. They can rationalize it away, convincing themselves it never happened, allowing their minds to build protective walls of denial. Or, in rare cases, they can accept the experience, integrate it into their worldview, and continue functioning despite the knowledge that reality isn't what they thought. Those in the third category sometimes become guardians, but more often, they simply become aware. They're the ones who check into hotels but immediately leave certain rooms. They avoid specific streets after dark without being able to explain why. They trust their instincts when something feels wrong, even if logic says everything's fine. These aware individuals form an unconscious network of early warning systems, their sensitivity to wrongness helping to identify problems before they escalate. My work now takes me across the country, responding to incidents, investigating reports of boundary weaknesses, training new guardians, and occasionally, performing the hardest duty of all, making someone forget. Memory modification is a terrible responsibility, reaching into someone's mind and removing or altering their recollection of events too traumatic or dangerous to remember. But sometimes, it's the kindest thing we can do, allowing someone to return to the blessed ignorance that lets them function in normal society. I've learned that the universe, or multiverse, or whatever term best describes the totality of existence, is far more complex than human science currently comprehends. There are layers upon layers of reality, each with its own rules, its own inhabitants, its own agendas. The boundaries between these layers aren't walls, but more like membranes, permeable under certain conditions, constantly requiring maintenance to prevent unwanted crossover. Humanity, for all its advancement, exists in a carefully maintained bubble of ignorance. This isn't a conspiracy in the traditional sense. There's no secret government organization or ancient society controlling information. Instead, it's a natural defense mechanism, both individual and collective, that prevents most people from perceiving things that would fundamentally destabilize their worldview and, by extension, their sanity. But the bubble isn't perfect. It never has been. Things leak through, people stumble into places they shouldn't be, and sometimes the other layers of reality take an interest in what's happening in ours. That's where guardians come in, not as soldiers in some cosmic war, but as maintenance workers, keeping the machinery of separation running, patching holes, redirecting intruders, and ensuring that the average person can live their entire life without ever realizing how thin the walls of their reality truly are. It's lonely work, by necessity. We can't share what we know with normal people, can't maintain regular relationships with those who haven't seen what we've seen. But there's a camaraderie among guardians, a shared understanding that transcends normal human connection. We gather occasionally, sharing stories, techniques, warnings about new threats or weakening boundaries. These meetings are the closest thing to family many of us have. I sometimes wonder what would happen if the boundaries failed completely, if all the walls came down and humanity was forced to confront the true nature of reality. Would we adapt, evolving quickly to handle the new paradigm? Or would civilization collapse under the weight of revelations too strange to process? The optimist in me wants to believe we'd rise to the challenge, but the part of me that's seen people break from single encounters knows better. So we continue our work, the secret guardians of consensus reality, ensuring that children can sleep safely in their beds, that hotels remain merely places to rest, that mirrors reflect only what stands before them, that the shadows obey the laws of light and physics. We stand watch in the dark places, face the things that shouldn't exist, and bear the weight of knowledge so others don't have to. It's not the life I planned, not the destiny I would have chosen, but it's the one I've been given. And despite the horrors, despite the isolation, despite the constant vigilance required, I found purpose in it. Every person who goes about their day unaware of what nearly broke through, Every child who grows up without encountering the things that hunt in the spaces between, every bit of normalcy preserved in an abnormal universe, makes the sacrifice worthwhile. The darkness is vast, hungry, and patient. But so are we, the guardians, the watchers, the ones who remember so others can forget. And as long as we stand watch, as long as we maintain the boundaries, as long as we guide the lost and contain the dangerous, the morning will continue to come, bringing with it the comfortable lie of a simple, understandable world. That's our gift to humanity. Not truth, but the freedom from truths too terrible to bear. And that, perhaps, is the most important guardian duty of all. The abandoned school. The email came through the district office on a Tuesday morning in October, just as the autumn chill was beginning to settle over Massachusetts. As a structural engineer specializing in educational facilities, I'd evaluated dozens of old schools for renovation or demolition, but something about this request felt different from the moment it hit my inbox. The building in question was Riverside Elementary, closed since 1987 after what the email vaguely referred to as a series of incidents. At 34, I'd built a reputation for being thorough, unflappable, and willing to take on projects others found too challenging or unsettling. My colleagues often joked that I had no imagination, that my purely analytical mind couldn't conceive of anything beyond load-bearing walls and foundation integrity. They weren't entirely wrong. I approached every building as a collection of materials and forces, mathematics and physics, nothing more. The drive to Riverside took me through increasingly desolate countryside, the urban sprawl giving way to abandoned farms and overgrown forests that seemed to press against the narrow road. The GPS lost signal twice, forcing me to navigate by an old paper map the district had provided, its edges yellowed and torn from age. When I finally found the access road, it was nearly invisible beneath a canopy of diseased elm trees, their branches creating a tunnel of decay. Riverside Elementary sat in a clearing that nature was actively reclaiming. Vines covered most of the brick facade, their tendrils having worked through mortar and around window frames, pulling the building back into the earth with patient determination. The playground equipment stood like rusted skeletons against the grey October sky, swings moving slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. The front doors, heavy oak panels that had probably been impressive when new, hung askew on broken hinges. The chain and padlock that should have sealed them lay on the ground, cut through with what looked like bolt cutters, though the cut seemed fresh despite the building supposedly being sealed for decades. I made a note about security concerns and pushed through the entrance. The smell hit me immediately, a combination of mold, decay, and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a main hallway that stretched impossibly far into the building. The checkerboard linoleum floor was buckled and water-damaged, creating an undulating surface that made walking treacherous. According to the floor plans I'd studied, Riverside was a modest two-story structure with 12 classrooms, a cafeteria, and a gymnasium. But as I walked deeper into the building, counting doorways and measuring distances with my laser rangefinder, the numbers didn't add up. There were too many rooms, too many hallways, intersections that shouldn't exist based on the building's footprint. The first classroom I entered still had children's artwork on the walls, construction paper crafts faded but intact, as if preserved in the stale air. The desks remained in neat rows, each with a nameplate still attached. I read them as I passed. Jennifer Martinez, Thomas Chen, Ashley Washington, names of children who would be middle-aged now if they'd survived whatever had happened here. It was in the third classroom that I found the first message. Written on the blackboard in chalk that should have faded decades ago were the words, "They're still here. They never left. Don't let them notice you." Below it, in what looked like a child's handwriting, someone had added, "If you can read this, you're already noticed." My rational mind immediately catalogued explanations. Urban explorers playing pranks, teenagers trying to create a viral video, local legends being perpetuated for thrills. But as I stood there, The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath, and I heard something that made every hair on my body stand on end. Children singing, faint but unmistakable. A nursery rhyme I remembered from my own elementary school days. The singing came from above, from the second floor that the building plans indicated had been sealed off after a fire in 1986. I found the stairwell, its door marked with warning tape so old it crumbled at my touch. The stairs themselves seemed solid enough, though each step produced a groan that echoed through the empty building in ways that defied acoustic logic. The second floor hallway was different from the first, darker despite my industrial-strength flashlight, with a quality to the air that made breathing difficult. The fire damage was evident here, black marks scorching the walls in patterns that looked almost deliberate, like massive fingerprints pressed into the plaster. But strangest of all were the classroom doors, each one slightly open, revealing glimpses of interiors that shouldn't exist. Through one door, I saw a classroom in perfect condition, children sitting at desks, heads bent over worksheets, completely motionless. Through another, the same room but destroyed, desks overturned, windows shattered, dark stains on the floor that looked disturbingly organic. And through a third, nothing but void, an absence of space that hurt to perceive directly. The singing grew louder as I approached the end of the hallway, where double doors marked library stood closed. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to run, to never look back. But professional curiosity, or perhaps something else, compelled me forward. The library was impossible. It was too large, extending beyond the building's exterior walls, with ceiling heights that the structure couldn't support. Bookshelves stretched upward into darkness, filled with volumes that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. And in the center of it all, sitting in a circle on a carpet that looked new despite the decades of abandonment, were children. They wore clothing from the 1980s, perfect and clean as if just pressed. They sat with their backs to me, holding hands, swaying slightly as they sang. Their voices were beautiful but wrong. Too many harmonies, too many layers, as if dozens of children were singing through just the 7 small bodies I could see. Ring Around the Rosie. They sang, but the words that followed weren't the ones I knew. Pockets full of souls, ashes, ashes. We never fall down. We never fall down. We never fall down. One of them turned to look at me, and I bit back a scream. Her face was perfect, porcelain perfect, but her eyes were gone, replaced by swirling darkness that seemed to pull at my vision. She smiled, revealing too many teeth, far too many teeth, and spoke in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. "You're late for class, Mr. Davidson," she said, though I'd never told anyone my name. "We've been waiting so long for a new teacher. The last one didn't work out. She couldn't handle the curriculum." The other children turned then, all with the same missing eyes, the same terrible smiles. They stood in unison, moving with a synchronization that suggested a single controlling intelligence. They began walking toward me, still holding hands, still singing that horrible version of the nursery rhyme. I ran. There's no shame in admitting it. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, crashing through the hallway, down the stairs that seemed to multiply beneath my feet, through corridors that hadn't been there before. The building had become a maze, each turn leading to another impossible passage, another room that defied physical laws. Behind me, I could hear them following, not footsteps but a sliding sound, as if they weren't quite touching the ground. Their singing echoed through the halls, getting closer despite my speed, despite the distance I thought I was putting between us. The sweet smell from earlier grew stronger, and I realized with horrible clarity that it was the scent of preservation, of things that should have decomposed but hadn't, couldn't, wouldn't. I burst through what I thought was the main entrance, but found myself in the cafeteria instead. The tables were set for lunch, trays of food that looked fresh but smelled of decades, milk cartons dated October 15th, 1987. On the wall, a banner read, "Welcome Parents," in cheerful letters, and below it, photographs of what I assumed was the last parent-teacher conference. The faces in the images all turned away from the camera, all except for the children, who stared directly at the lens with those same dark, empty sockets. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt like a physical weight. I stood in the cafeteria, gasping for breath, trying to orient myself, when I heard a new sound. Applause. Slow, measured applause coming from the kitchen. The serving window, which should have shown the kitchen beyond, instead revealed what looked like a theater stage. Red curtains pulled back to show rows of seats filled with motionless figures. "The new teacher has arrived," announced a voice that sounded like grinding glass. "Let the lesson begin." The lights went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, but simply ceased, as if light itself had been deleted from existence. My flashlight produced no beam. My phone screen remained dark despite my frantic pressing. In that absolute darkness, I felt them surrounding me, their presence like cold spots in an already frigid room, their breathing, if it could be called that, creating air currents that shouldn't exist. "First lesson," whispered voices from every direction. "History. Do you know what happened here, Mr. Davidson? Do you know why we're still having class after all these years?" Images flooded my mind, not memories but forced visions. I saw the school in 1987, saw a teacher named Mrs. Patricia Henley who discovered something wrong with certain students, children who never aged, who'd been attending Riverside for decades. I saw her try to expose them, saw her set the fire that was meant to destroy them, saw how it had only made things worse, trapping them between states, neither living nor dead, neither here nor fully elsewhere. "She failed her exam," the voices continued, "as did the inspector before you, and the one before him. They're all still here, still learning, still trying to graduate. Would you like to join our faculty, Mr. Davidson? We have an opening." The darkness began to lift, not gradually, but in patches, revealing glimpses of impossible things. Classrooms stacked vertically like filing cabinets. Hallways that curved back on themselves. A gymnasium where gravity worked sideways. Equipment and debris suspended on walls that had become floors. And everywhere, those children with their hollow eyes and too many teeth, standing, watching, waiting. I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I'm just here to inspect the building. For the district. For demolition." Laughter erupted from everywhere at once, a sound like breaking bells. "Demolition? Oh, Mr. Davidson, you can't demolish what doesn't fully exist. You can't destroy what's already between. We're neither here nor there, neither then nor now. We're in the spaces between seconds, in the pause between heartbeats. Riverside Elementary will stand forever, just sideways to reality." The exit appeared then, suddenly and inexplicably, the front doors standing open to reveal October sunlight that looked like salvation. I didn't question it, didn't pause to wonder why they were letting me go. I ran through those doors and didn't stop until I reached my car, fumbling with keys that felt foreign in my shaking hands. As I drove away, I looked back once in the rearview mirror. The school looked different, newer, as if freshly built. Children played on the playground, teachers watched from windows, a normal scene from decades past. But I knew better. I could see the wrongness in their movements, the way they flickered between frames of existence, the way their shadows fell in directions that made no sense. I submitted my report to the district that evening, recommending immediate, indefinite postponement of any renovation or demolition. I cited structural anomalies, environmental hazards, anything I could think of that would keep people away without sounding insane. They accepted it without question, almost as if they'd expected this outcome, as if every inspector sent to Riverside Elementary had submitted the same vague warnings. That was 3 years ago. I still have nightmares about those empty eye sockets, still hear that twisted nursery rhyme when I'm alone at night. Sometimes, in my peripheral vision, I catch glimpses of small figures in 1980s clothing, standing in impossible places, watching, waiting. I've changed careers, moved across the country, but distance doesn't matter to things that exist between spaces. Last week, I received an email from an address that shouldn't exist, from a domain that was never registered. It contained a single line: "Parent-teacher conferences are coming up, Mr. Davidson. We've saved you a seat." Attached was a photograph of Riverside Elementary's cafeteria, the tables set for a meeting, and in the foreground, a nameplate reading "Structural Engineering Consultant" at what was clearly meant to be my place. I haven't slept since. I know they're waiting. I know that someday, somehow, I'll have to go back. Because once Riverside Elementary notices you, you become part of its curriculum. And nobody ever really graduates. The Uber driver. The gig economy saved me when I lost my corporate job at 37. Uber driving wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me flexibility while I figured out my next move. I preferred the night shift, when the roads were clearer and the passengers were usually too drunk or tired to make small talk. I'd been driving for 6 months without incident, maintaining a perfect 5-star rating, until the night I picked up a passenger who wasn't entirely there. It was a Thursday in February, the kind of bitter cold night that kept most people indoors. I was working the area around downtown Portland, hoping to catch the bar crowd, when I got a ping for a pickup at an address I didn't recognize. The GPS led me to an industrial area I usually avoided, all abandoned warehouses and broken streetlights, the kind of place where nothing good happened after dark. The pickup location was a narrow alley between 2 derelict buildings. I almost cancelled, my instincts screaming that this was a bad idea, but the surge pricing was 3.5x, and I needed the money. I pulled up to the pin location, keeping my doors locked while I waited. The app showed the passenger's name as M. Gray, with a perfect 5.0 rating from other drivers, which reassured me slightly. After 3 minutes, just as I was about to leave, someone approached from the shadows. They moved strangely, their gait uneven as if they were injured or drunk. As they got closer to the streetlight, I got my first clear look at my passenger, and immediately wished I hadn't. M. Gray was wrong in every way a person could be wrong while still technically appearing human. Their proportions were off, arms slightly too long, neck bent at an angle that should have been painful. They wore a dark suit that looked expensive but decades out of style, and their face was partially obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat that belonged in a 1940s noir film. They opened the rear door and slid into my back seat with a fluid motion that contradicted their awkward walking gait. The temperature in the car dropped instantly, my breath fogging despite the heater running full blast. In the rearview mirror, I could only see a vague outline where they sat, as if they were partially transparent or my eyes couldn't quite focus on them. "Good evening," they said, their voice like whispers layered on top of each other, creating an echo effect that made my teeth ache. "I need to go to several locations tonight. I'll make it worth your while." They held up a phone showing the Uber app, but the screen was wrong, displaying an interface I'd never seen before, with options and text in a language that hurt to read. The destination showed as various $500 fare guaranteed. $500 for one night's work. I needed that money desperately, had bills overdue, rent coming up. Against every instinct, I accepted the ride. "First stop," M. Gray said, 1428 Evergreen Terrace. I knew that address. It was a house in the suburbs that had been in the news recently, a family of 4 who'd disappeared without a trace, leaving behind dinner still warm on the table, television still playing, no signs of struggle or preparation for departure. The police had no leads, no theories that made sense. The drive took 20 minutes, during which M. Gray sat in perfect stillness, not even the subtle movements of breathing. The only sound was a soft humming, a tune I didn't recognize, but that made my skin crawl. When I glanced in the mirror, sometimes they were there, sometimes the seat appeared empty, and once, just for a moment, I saw something else entirely, something with too many angles and dimensions that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. We arrived at the house, which was dark except for a single upstairs window that flickered with a light that wasn't quite electric. The police tape had been removed, but the yard was overgrown, newspapers piling up on the porch, signs of abandonment that didn't match the recent timeline of the disappearance. "Wait here," M. Gray said, exiting the car with that same fluid motion. "Keep the engine running." They walked up to the front door, which opened before they touched it. They disappeared inside, and I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The radio started picking up strange frequencies, voices speaking backwards, music that sounded like it was played on instruments that didn't exist. I turned it off, but the sounds continued, coming from the speakers even without power. 10 minutes passed. 15. I was about to leave when M. Gray returned, but they weren't alone. 4 figures followed them, walking in perfect synchronization, their faces blank, eyes unfocused. I recognized them from the news reports, the missing family. But something was different about them now, their movements too smooth, their skin with a subtle shimmer like oil on water. They all got into my car, the family of 4 somehow fitting in the back seat with M. Gray despite the physical impossibility of it. The car sagged under weight that didn't match what 5 people should weigh, and the windows fogged instantly from the cold they brought with them. "Next stop," M. Gray said, as if this was perfectly normal. "The Riverside Hospice Center." I drove in silence, too terrified to speak, too confused to process what was happening. The family sat perfectly still, not speaking, not blinking, not even seeming to breathe. When we passed under streetlights, they became translucent, and I could see through them to the street beyond. The hospice center was a small facility on the outskirts of town, specializing in end-of-life care. M. Gray exited alone this time, walking through the locked front doors as if they weren't there. They returned with 3 elderly people in hospital gowns, their feet bare despite the freezing pavement. These new passengers phased through the car's doors, taking up space that didn't exist, the interior of my Honda Civic somehow accommodating 9 people without anyone touching. "The cemetery," M. Gray announced. "Riverside Memorial." My hands moved of their own accord, steering toward a destination I didn't want to visit. The car felt heavy, sluggish, as if I was driving through thick liquid rather than air. The headlights illuminated things that shouldn't be there, shadows moving independently of their sources, road signs that changed their text when I looked directly at them. Riverside Memorial was the oldest cemetery in Portland, dating back to the 1800s. The gates were locked, but M. Gray simply gestured, and they swung open silently. I drove down the narrow path between grave markers, my headlights catching names and dates that seemed to shift and change. "Stop here," M. Gray commanded at a section of newer graves. All of my passengers except M. Gray exited the vehicle, moving toward specific graves that I realized with growing horror bore their names. The missing family stood before 4 fresh plots dated the day they'd disappeared. The elderly people found graves with yesterday's date. One by one, they sank into the earth as if it was water, disappearing without disturbing a single blade of grass. M. Gray remained in the back seat, that layered voice carrying a tone that might have been satisfaction. "They were between states, you understand. Neither here nor there. I'm something of a conductor. I help people complete their journeys when they get stuck in transition." "Are they dead?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Dead, alive. These are binary terms for a spectrum of existence," M. Gray replied. "They are where they're supposed to be now. As are you, driver. You're exactly where you need to be." The words sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean?" "Check your phone." With trembling hands, I looked at my device. The date was wrong. It showed 3 days from now. The news app had an article already loaded. Local Uber driver found dead in vehicle at Riverside Memorial Cemetery. No, I gasped, dropping the phone. No, I'm not dead. I'm not. Not yet. M. Gray agreed. But time isn't as linear as you perceive it. You've been driving between moments, shepherding souls through the spaces between heartbeats. You picked me up 3 days from now, and you've been driving backwards through time, collecting those who got lost between states. My mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of it all. Why me? Because in 3 days, you'll accept a ride from a passenger at 2:47 a.m. They'll direct you to an abandoned building on the industrial side of town. You'll go inside to check on them when they don't come back out. You won't return to your vehicle. Your body won't be found for a week. Then I won't take that ride, I said desperately. I'll avoid it. M. Gray's laughter was like glass breaking in reverse. You can't avoid what's already happened in one timeline. But I'm offering you a choice. Continue driving for me, ferrying souls through the in-between, and you can extend your time indefinitely. You'll exist in the spaces between seconds, never quite alive but never fully dead. Or return to your linear timeline and meet your appointment with destiny in 3 days. I looked at the cemetery around me, at the graves of people I'd just delivered to their final rest, at the impossible space my car had become. The choice was no choice at all, a kind of immortality in service to something I didn't understand, or death in 3 days. What would I have to do? I asked. What you've been doing tonight. Drive. Pick up passengers who aren't quite there. Take them where they need to go. Help maintain the balance between states of being. You'll see things that shouldn't exist, visit places that aren't on any map, carry passengers who've forgotten they're dead or aren't quite alive yet. But you'll continue, in a fashion. I thought about my empty apartment, my lack of family, my directionless existence since losing my job. Was there really anything to return to? At least this had purpose, even if I didn't fully understand it. I'll do it, I said quietly. M. Gray leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw their face clearly in the rearview mirror. It was my face, but older, weathered by years or decades of existing between moments. I smiled with too many teeth. Excellent choice, my future self said. Now, let's discuss your route. You have pickups across 17 different timeline variations tonight, and some of the passengers can be difficult. That was 2 years ago, or yesterday, or tomorrow. Time has no meaning when you drive between moments. I ferried hundreds of souls through the in-between, picked up passengers from car accidents that haven't happened yet, delivered suicides to peace before they've made their final choice, carried the confused dead to acceptance, and the stubborn living back to their proper timeline. My car exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously now, bigger inside than outside, capable of holding infinite passengers or none at all. The GPS shows destinations that aren't on any map. The Museum of Lost Things, the Hospital for Temporal Displacement, the School for Children Who Never Were. I drive through Portland and Portland-adjacent realities, where the city is sometimes ruins, sometimes paradise, sometimes nothing but fog and suggestion. M. Gray still rides with me occasionally, though I've realized we're the same person at different points in our existence, a temporal loop that has no beginning or end. They teach me the rules of the in-between. Never look directly at passengers who cast no reflection. Always keep driving no matter what appears in the road. Never accept payment from those who offer coins with faces you recognize as your own. Last week, or next month, I picked up a family of 4 from 1428 Evergreen Terrace. They were confused, scared, didn't understand why they couldn't go home. I drove them through the spaces between heartbeats to their final destination, just as M. Gray had done, will do, is doing. The cycle continues. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, but then I remember, in the in-between, all choices have already been made, will be made, are being made. I am the Uber driver who died, who lived, who exists between states. I am M. Gray, and M. Gray is me, and we drive through the night eternal, picking up the lost and delivering them to wherever they need to be. If you ever request an Uber late at night and your driver seems not quite there, if the car feels bigger inside than it should, if you arrive at your destination before you've traveled the distance, you might be riding with one of us, the drivers of the in-between. Don't worry. We'll get you where you need to go, even if it's not where you thought you were going. The meter's always running, but the fare is something other than money. And remember, we accept all major credit cards, cash, and occasionally, the surrender of linear time. 5 stars appreciated. The storage unit. The text message arrived on a Wednesday afternoon while I was teaching my high school history class. Your Aunt Margaret has passed. As her only living relative, you've inherited storage unit number 47 at Secure Store Portland. Please contact us to arrange transfer of ownership. I hadn't spoken to Aunt Margaret in 15 years, hadn't even known she was still alive, but apparently I was all she had left. At 41, I'd learned not to look gift horses in the mouth. Margaret had been the black sheep of the family, ostracized for reasons my parents would never fully explain. All I remembered was a wild-haired woman who'd sometimes show up at family gatherings with strange gifts and stranger stories, talking about places that didn't exist and people who weren't quite people. The last time I'd seen her, she'd grabbed my hands and told me I had the sight, but hadn't opened it yet. My parents had hustled her out immediately after that. Secure Store Portland was located in an industrial area that had seen better days, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned warehouses. The facility itself was a massive complex of identical units, a maze of corrugated metal and concrete that seemed to go on forever. The manager, a thin man with nervous eyes who introduced himself as Carl, led me through the labyrinthine corridors to unit number 47. Your aunt was one of our longest-term renters, Carl explained, his voice echoing off the metal walls. 37 years, paid up through the end of next year. Never missed a payment, even after. Well, even at the end. She must have set up automatic billing. He handed me a key that felt unusually cold and heavy. I should warn you, we've had some complaints about this unit. Nothing serious, just odd noises, temperature fluctuations. Probably just the ventilation system, but I wanted you to know. Carl left quickly, too quickly, almost running back toward the office. I stood before unit number 47, a standard 10 by 20 space with a rolling metal door. There was nothing obviously unusual about it, except for the symbols scratched into the metal around the lock, symbols that hurt to look at directly, that seemed to shift when I wasn't focusing on them. The lock turned easily despite its apparent age, and the door rolled up with a grinding shriek that echoed through the facility. The smell that wafted out was indescribable, like old books mixed with ozone and something else, something that reminded me of the moment before lightning strikes. The unit was impossibly deep. I know it was only supposed to be 20 feet, but I could see rows of shelves extending back into darkness well beyond that. The overhead light flickered on automatically, but its glow only penetrated the first few yards, leaving the rest in shadow that seemed almost solid. The front area was organized meticulously. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each labeled with dates ranging from 1952 to 2024. Boxes were stacked with military precision, marked with locations I recognized and many I didn't. Portland Incident, 1987. The Yellowstone Paradox, 1999. Brighton Beach Temporal Anomaly, 2003. On a desk near the entrance sat a letter addressed to me in Margaret's spidery handwriting. Dear Andrea, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and you've inherited more than just a storage unit. I'm sorry for that. I tried to keep the family out of this, but blood calls to blood, and you have the gift whether you want it or not. This unit contains my life's work, documentation of the places where reality wears thin, where other things leak through. I've spent 40 years cataloging incidents, collecting evidence, trying to understand the patterns. It's all here, everything I've learned about the spaces between spaces. You'll think I'm crazy. That's fine. I thought the same when it was passed to me. But you'll see things now that you've been here. The unit changes people, opens their perception. There's no going back. Whatever you do, don't go past the red line on the floor. That section doesn't belong to our reality anymore. I've been feeding it to keep it contained, but now that responsibility falls to you. Instructions are in Cabinet A, File 1. I'm sorry, Margaret. I looked down and saw the red line she mentioned, painted about 10 feet into the unit. Beyond it, the shadows seemed to move independently, and I could swear I heard whispers in languages that predated human speech. Cabinet A, File 1 contained detailed instructions that made my rational mind rebel. According to Margaret's notes, the back section of the unit had become a dimensional weak point in 1991, a place where something she called the hungry dark pressed against our reality. She'd been feeding it regularly, objects with strong emotional resonance, to keep it from expanding. The feeding schedule was precise. Every 13 days, place an object with significant personal meaning past the red line. Watch it be consumed. Document any changes. Never, under any circumstances, cross the line yourself. I spent hours going through her files, each one more impossible than the last. Photographs of people who cast the wrong number of shadows. Videotapes that showed empty rooms until you watched them in reverse, revealing figures that shouldn't exist. Audio recordings of voices speaking from inside solid walls. And maps, dozens of maps of Portland with areas marked in red, places where Margaret claimed reality was infected. As I read, I became aware that I was being watched, not from outside the unit, but from within, from past that red line where the darkness was too thick, too present. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement, shapes that didn't quite resolve into anything recognizable. And the whispers grew louder, more insistent, though I couldn't understand the words. I left as sunset approached, but the unit followed me home. In my peripheral vision, I kept seeing shadows that extended too far, had too many angles. My apartment felt different, as if the spaces between furniture had grown larger, darker, and when I looked in mirrors, sometimes my reflection moved a fraction of a second late. The next day, I returned with a box of my ex-husband's things I'd been meaning to throw away, objects heavy with the emotional weight of a failed marriage. I placed the box carefully past the red line and watched as the darkness embraced it. The box didn't just disappear. It was unmade, dissolved into component atoms and then into something less than that, absorbed into the hungry void that pressed against our world. The whispers changed after that, became almost grateful, and for just a moment the darkness pulled back, revealing what lay beyond, a vast expanse of nothing that was somehow also everything, where the rules of physics were suggestions and time moved in all directions at once. I saw Margaret there, or what remained of her, transformed into something that could exist in that impossible space. She smiled at me with a face that kept changing, features flowing like liquid. "You understand now." Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "We're the keepers, the feeders, the ones who maintain the boundary. It's thankless work, but necessary. Without us, it would all come tumbling through. I've been tending the unit for 6 months now. Every 13 days, I bring offerings to the hungry dark, and each time, I understand a little more. The storage facility isn't just a building. It's a network of containment sites, each unit holding back something that shouldn't exist but does. Carl knows, of course. He's not entirely human anymore, transformed by decades of proximity to these anomalies, but he maintains the facility, ensures the rent is paid, keeps the curious away. I've met others like me, inheritors of impossible responsibilities. We meet monthly in unit number 13, which exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously, to share information and support. There's Robert, who maintains a unit full of doors that open to places that were never built. Sarah, whose unit contains every item that's ever been truly lost, an infinite collection that grows daily. And James, who stores the dreams of the dead, keeping them from leaking into the sleep of the living. My teaching has suffered. How can I focus on mundane history when I know the real history, the secret history of humanity's constant battle against things that want to unmake us? But I continue, using my position to identify students who have the sight, who might one day inherit their own storage units, their own responsibilities. Last week, I made a mistake. I crossed the red line. It was intentional, born from curiosity that had been growing since that first glimpse of the space beyond. I wanted to understand what Margaret had become, what awaited me if I failed in my duties. The moment I stepped over, reality shifted, twisted, became something other. I existed in multiple states simultaneously, standing in the unit, floating in void, dispersed across dimensions, consolidated into a single point of consciousness. I saw the truth of the hungry dark, that it wasn't malevolent but necessary, a recycling system for reality's waste, breaking down the impossible things that accumulate in the margins of existence. And I saw the future, or a future, where the barriers fail and the storage units break open, releasing decades of contained impossibilities into the world. I saw cities, where geometry didn't work, where people walked through walls because the walls had forgotten how to be solid. I saw the sky full of doors that opened to nowhere and everywhere, saw time flowing backward in pockets while racing forward in others. But I also saw the other future, the one we're working toward, where humanity gradually adapts to the truth, where the storage units become museums of impossibility, teaching tools for a species learning to navigate a universe far stranger than they imagined. Margaret pulled me back before I dissolved completely into the between space. Her form, now more concept than physical being, pushed me across the red line with winds that didn't exist. I collapsed on the concrete floor, gasping, my body struggling to remember how to be singular, how to exist in just 3 dimensions. Too soon, her voice whispered from the darkness. But you'll understand when it's time. We all cross eventually. It's not death, just transformation, evolution, the next necessary step. Now I know too much. I see the thin places everywhere, the corner of 5th and Morrison where reality hiccups every Tuesday at 3:17 p.m., the house on Belmont that exists in 7 timelines simultaneously, the park where children who were never born play on swings that shouldn't cast shadows but do. I continue my duties, feeding the hungry dark, maintaining the barriers, teaching history to students who have no idea their teacher spends her evenings cataloguing impossibilities. But I also prepare, gathering those with the sight, building a network of people who can see beyond the veil. Because the changes are accelerating, the boundaries weakening, and someday soon, the storage units won't be enough. When that day comes, we'll need everyone who can perceive the truth, everyone who can navigate the spaces between spaces. Until then, I maintain unit number 47. I feed the darkness, and I document everything, adding to Margaret's impossible archive. If you inherit a storage unit from a relative you barely knew, if the manager seems nervous and leaves too quickly, if you find a red line on the floor with warnings not to cross it, know that you've been chosen. Not blessed, not cursed, just selected by blood or circumstance to hold back the impossible for a little while longer. The rent is always paid. The darkness is always hungry. And somewhere past that red line, the previous owners wait, transformed into something necessary, something eternal, something that watches and whispers and remembers what it was like to be human. The late night train. I've always been a night person, but working the graveyard shift as a security guard at Grand Central Terminal in New York City brought new meaning to the term. At 29, it was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills while I finished my novel. 3 years later, I was still there, walking the same empty platforms, checking the same locked doors, and trying to ignore the trains that weren't supposed to exist. The first time I saw one was during my second week on the job. It was 3:47 a.m., that dead time when even the city that never sleeps takes a brief nap. I was doing my rounds on the lower level when I heard it, the distinctive sound of a train arriving on track 117. The problem was, track 117 had been sealed off in 1945. It didn't appear on any modern maps, and the entrance had been walled over decades ago. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the underground darkness. The wall where track 117 should have been looked solid, but as I approached, it became translucent, like looking through fogged glass. Beyond it, I could see an old steam locomotive, the kind that hadn't run in New York since the early 1900s. Passengers were disembarking, all dressed in period clothing, all moving with a jerky, slightly too fast motion of old film reels. I reached out to touch the wall, and my hand passed through as if it were mist. The cold that emanated from the other side was absolute, the kind that burns. I yanked my hand back, and the wall solidified immediately. The sounds faded, the translucency disappeared, and I was left staring at ordinary concrete, wondering if I'd imagined it all. My supervisor, Garrett, found me there 20 minutes later, still staring at the wall. He was an older man, close to retirement, with eyes that had seen too much. He took one look at my face and sighed. "You saw it, didn't you? Track 117. I nodded, unable to form words. "Come on," he said, leading me to the security office. "There are things you need to know about this place if you're going to last." Over lukewarm coffee that tasted like disappointment, Garrett explained the reality of Grand Central after midnight. The terminal, he said, was a convergence point, a place where the veils between times and possibilities were thin. Trains arrived from when they shouldn't, carrying passengers to destinations that didn't exist, at least not in our version of New York. Track 117 is the most active, he explained, pulling out a worn notebook filled with dates and observations. But there are others. Track 31 gets the future trains, sleek things that don't need rails. Track 66, that's where the lost trains arrive, the ones that disappeared from history. And track 13. We don't talk about track 13. He showed me the logs, decades of sightings documented by security guards who'd learned to see what shouldn't be there. The 3:47 a.m. ghost train on track 117 that arrived every 13 days. The midnight express on track 31 that came from 2087, according to a passenger who'd once spoken to a guard before realizing they were in the wrong decade. The trains full of soldiers from wars that never happened, or happened differently. Why doesn't anyone do anything about it? I asked. Garrett laughed, but there was no humor in it. Who would believe us? And besides, they're mostly harmless. They arrive, they depart. They don't interact with our reality much. We just have to make sure regular people don't stumble into them. That's the real job, kid. Not security, but separation. Keeping the normal folks from seeing what would break their minds. I thought he was hazing me, or maybe drinking on the job, until I saw my second impossible train 2 weeks later. This one arrived on track 31 at exactly midnight. It was magnificent and terrible, a fusion of organic and mechanical that hurt to perceive directly. The train seemed to be grown rather than built, its surface resembling scales or possibly wings, shifting between states as I watched. The passengers were wrong too tall, too angular, wearing clothes that seemed to be made of condensed light. One of them saw me watching and approached the barrier between their platform and mine. Up close, I could see they were human, or had been once. Evolution or modification had changed them into something else, something that could survive in whatever future they came from. "You're early," they said, their voice harmonizing with itself. "The convergence isn't for another 60 years, your time." "What convergence?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "When all the tracks align, when every train that ever was or will be arrives at once. Grand Central becomes Grand Central becomes Grand Central. Infinite terminals in infinite realities, all occupying the same space. It happens every few centuries, local time. The last one was in 1871, though your history doesn't record it correctly." Before I could ask more questions, their train departed, leaving behind only the smell of ozone and a lingering headache from trying to process what I'd seen. I started documenting everything, adding to Garrett's notebook. I learned the patterns, the schedules of impossible arrivals. The war train that came every Monday at 2:15 a.m., carrying soldiers from the American invasion of Canada in 1976, a war that never happened in our timeline. The empty train that arrived full but departed empty, and if you looked too closely at the windows, you could see the passengers were still there, just removed from our visible spectrum. But it was track 13 that finally showed me the true horror of Grand Central's midnight secret. Garrett had warned me repeatedly to avoid track 13, to never even look in its direction during my rounds. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when you've already seen so many impossible sights. One night, when Garrett was off sick and I was alone in the terminal, I decided to investigate. Track 13 was in the deepest part of the terminal, accessed through a maintenance door that required 3 different keys to open. The stairs down were older than they should be, carved from stone that predated the terminal itself. The walls were covered in graffiti, but not the modern kind. These were symbols, warnings perhaps, in languages that might have been ancient or might have been from futures where humanity had evolved beyond current comprehension. The platform itself was wrong. It was too long, extending beyond the boundaries of the building, possibly beyond the boundaries of Manhattan itself. The tracks didn't contain rails, but rather grooves carved into what looked like obsidian, and they glowed faintly with a light that didn't illuminate anything around them. I should have left then, but I heard the train approaching. It didn't arrive, it manifested, slowly becoming real as if someone was tuning it into existence. The train was a patchwork of every train that had ever existed or would exist, pieces from different eras and realities stitched together by something that didn't understand or care about consistency. A Victorian steam engine melded into a Japanese bullet train, melded into something that might have been organic. All of it wrong, all of it impossible. The doors opened, and passengers began to disembark. But these weren't people, not anymore. They were concepts given form, ideas that had taken physical shape. I saw democracy step onto the platform, a constantly shifting amalgamation of faces and documents and protests. Behind it came entropy, leaving decay in its wake. Then cancer, spreading across the platform like a living shadow. War, famine, love, hate, all of them made manifest, all of them walking among us. "They ride track 13 to get where they need to go," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Garrett there, but not the Garrett I knew. This version was older, younger, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Abstract concepts need transportation too. How else would democracy spread to new nations, or cancer find new hosts? Track 13 is their subway, their way of moving through reality. "This is insane," I whispered. "Sanity is just another passenger," he replied, pointing to a small, frightened-looking thing huddled in a corner of the train. "It doesn't ride often anymore. The world's gotten too strange for it." I watched in horror as the concepts dispersed into the terminal, passing through walls, ascending through ceilings, going to wherever they were needed or wanted. One of them, a beautiful and terrible thing that might have been hope or despair, they were too similar to tell apart, approached me. "You're not supposed to be here," it said with a voice like breaking hearts and dawning realization. "Security guards are meant to keep people out, not witness the truth." "I had to know," I said. "Knowledge is 3 cars back," it replied. "But I wouldn't disturb it. It's been very aggressive lately, forcing itself on people who aren't ready. That's why there are so many conspiracy theorists now. Knowledge got tired of being ignored." The train departed, taking its impossible passengers to spread throughout the city, the world, reality itself. I stood on the empty platform, trying to process what I'd seen, trying to understand my place in a universe where abstract concepts rode public transportation. Garrett, the real Garrett, found me there hours later, catatonic, staring at the obsidian tracks. "I warned you," he said sadly. "Track 13 breaks everyone eventually. That's why we have such high turnover in security. Sooner or later, everyone looks." He helped me back to the office, gave me a drink from a flask that burned going down but helped reassemble my scattered thoughts. "You've got 2 choices now," he said. "You can quit, leave New York, try to forget what you've seen. Most do. Or you can stay, help us manage this insanity, keep the secret, protect the ignorant." I stayed. What else could I do? Once you know that love takes the 3:15 a.m. train to Brooklyn, that death prefers the express, that hope and despair share a monthly pass, you can't just walk away. Someone has to watch, to witness, to ensure the abstract and the concrete don't collide too catastrophically. It's been 5 years now. I've seen trains from every era, every possibility, every timeline that could be. I've spoken to passengers from futures where humanity has transcended physical form, and from pasts where we never came down from the trees. I've helped lost time travelers find their platforms, directed confused ideas to track 13, and once had to explain to the concept of taxation why it couldn't claim the entire terminal as a deduction. The terminal is expanding, adding new tracks that shouldn't fit in the space available. Track 200 now connects to Mars, but only on Tuesdays. Track 500 goes to places that don't have names because language hasn't evolved enough to describe them. And somewhere, in the ever-growing maze of platforms and possibilities, there's a track that leads home, though I'm no longer sure where or when that is. If you ever find yourself in Grand Central after midnight, and you see platforms that aren't on your map, hear trains that sound wrong, or notice passengers who don't quite fit reality, just keep walking. Don't investigate. Don't follow the strange sounds. And whatever you do, don't go looking for track 13. Some knowledge is too heavy for human minds to carry. Some truths are better left to ride the rails alone, arriving and departing in the darkness, managed by those of us who've already sacrificed our sanity to keep the world turning on its proper tracks. The family reunion. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door despite the building's security system. The paper felt old, older than it should be, with edges that seemed to age and renew themselves as I watched. The message was written in my grandmother's handwriting, which was impossible since she'd been dead for 15 years. Family reunion, October 31st, 8 p.m. The Old Harrington Estate. Your attendance is mandatory. Blood calls to blood. At 43, I'd successfully avoided my extended family for the better part of 2 decades. The Harringtons were old New England stock, the kind of family with too much history and too many secrets. We had money, the kind that came from sources no one discussed, and traditions that seemed to predate the country itself. I'd run from all of it after college, changed my name, built a normal life as a marketing executive in Seattle. But apparently, you can't run from blood. The Harrington estate sat on 17 acres of prime Massachusetts woodland, hidden from the road by trees that grew too close together, too dark even in daylight. I hadn't been back since my grandfather's funeral when I was 16, and the place looked exactly the same, as if time had decided to skip this particular property. The house itself defied architectural logic. It had been added to by generations of increasingly eccentric Harringtons, creating a maze of rooms, wings, and levels that didn't quite match up. Windows opened onto walls, stairs led to nowhere, and doors sometimes opened onto different rooms depending on when you opened them. As a child, I'd gotten lost for 6 hours in what should have been a simple hallway. Cars filled the circular driveway, some modern, others that looked like they'd driven straight from the 1950s. I recognized a few license plates: Cousin Michael from Portland, Aunt Vivian from New Orleans, Uncle Theodore from somewhere in Alaska he'd never fully specified. But there were other vehicles too, a horse-drawn carriage that looked fresh from the 1800s, something that might have been a car but had too many wheels and moved without touching the ground. The front door opened before I could knock. Standing there was Cousin Eliza, who died in a car accident in 2003. She looked exactly as she had at her funeral, down to the dress we'd buried her in, except her eyes were now completely black. "Rebecca!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was too cold, too solid. "We were afraid you wouldn't come. The family isn't complete without everyone." The foyer was packed with relatives, some I recognized, many I didn't, and several who couldn't possibly be there. Great-great-grandmother Constance, who died in 1934, was chatting with nephew Timothy, who wouldn't be born for another 3 years according to his pregnant mother standing nearby. Uncle Robert was there twice, once at age 30 and once at age 70, both versions engaged in animated conversation. "Don't look so shocked," Aunt Vivian said, approaching with a glass of wine that glowed slightly. "Haven't you figured it out yet? Time doesn't apply to Harringtons the way it does to others. We exist across all our moments simultaneously. Death is just another state of being for us." I wanted to run, but the door had disappeared, replaced by a wall covered in family portraits that moved, their painted eyes tracking my movement. The windows showed not the October night outside, but different seasons, different years, possibly different realities entirely. "The reunion," Grandfather Augustus announced, though he'd been cremated when I was 16, "happens once every 100 years, though not always in the same century. We gather across time, across death, across possibility. Every Harrington who was, is, or will be." The dining room had been extended impossibly to accommodate the crowd. The table stretched beyond what the house could contain, disappearing into a darkness that suggested it continued indefinitely. Place cards bore names I recognized and names that hurt to read, written in languages that might not have been invented yet. I was seated between Cousin Margaret, died 1987, and nephew David, not yet conceived. Across from me sat 3 versions of myself, at age 7, at what looked like 60, and one that was wrong, with features that had evolved or devolved into something not quite human. "Try the soup," suggested my 7-year-old self. "It's made from tomorrow's vegetables." The meal was impossible. Courses arrived from different eras, served by staff who flickered between visible and invisible. We ate foods that hadn't been discovered yet, drank wines from vineyards that had burned centuries ago. Conversation flowed across languages, some not human, discussing events that had happened, would happen, might happen. "The family business is thriving," announced Uncle Theodore, though which version of him was speaking I couldn't tell. "Our investments in alternate realities are paying off handsomely. The breeding program is ahead of schedule," added Aunt Constance, who'd been dead for 90 years. "The new generation will be able to exist in multiple time streams simultaneously without the usual madness." "And the barriers?" asked someone I didn't recognize, their face a blur of features from different family members. "Are they holding?" "For now," Grandfather replied, "but we'll need Rebecca's help. She's the only one who successfully escaped the family influence." That makes her valuable. All eyes, including my own past and future versions, turned to me. I don't understand, I said, though part of me was beginning to. What are we? We're an evolution, Mother said, and I realized with horror she was there too, despite my watching her die 5 years ago. The Harrington line has been developing for centuries, breeding for specific traits, the ability to perceive time non-linearly, to exist in multiple states simultaneously, to maintain consciousness across death. We're becoming something new, something necessary. Necessary for what? For what's coming, replied my older self, the 60-year-old version. In 20 years, your time, the barriers between realities will collapse. Humanity will need guides, people who can navigate the chaos of infinite possibilities existing in the same space. That's what we're becoming. That's what we've always been becoming. The room began to shift, showing me visions of the future, or futures. I saw cities where past and present existed simultaneously, where dead and living walked the same streets. I saw the collapse of linear time, the merger of all possible realities into one impossible whole. And I saw the Harringtons, my family, serving as anchors, as guides, as the only ones who could maintain their sense of self in the chaos. But I rejected this. I protested. I left. I lived a normal life. There's no such thing as normal for a Harrington, laughed Cousin Michael, both the version I remembered and one that had too many arms. Your rejection was part of the plan. We needed someone who could pass for normal, who could live among regular humans without suspicion. You're our bridge, Rebecca, our translator between what we're becoming and what humanity still is. The youngest version of me, 7 years old with pigtails I'd forgotten I'd ever worn, took my hand. Don't be scared, she said. We've seen how it ends. We win. Humanity survives. But only because we become what we need to become. And if I refuse? You can't, said my older self sadly. I remember this conversation. I remember the choice you're about to make. Because I already made it, will make it, am making it. The dining room expanded again, showing me more family members, stretching back to the founding of the Harrington line in the 1600s, forward to descendants that wouldn't exist for centuries. All of them were there. All of them were part of this gathering that existed outside of time. The reunion isn't just a gathering, Grandmother explained, though she spoke with the voice of every grandmother I'd ever had or would have. It's a synchronization. We align our time streams, share information across our existences, ensure the plan continues regardless of individual deaths or births. We are one family, one consciousness, spread across time like butter on bread. The metaphor was absurd, but I understood it. I could feel it happening, my perception expanding, seeing my life not as a line but as a sphere, all moments existing simultaneously. I was being born, dying, and everything in between, all at once. Welcome home, the family said in unison, their voices creating harmonics that shouldn't exist. I wanted to resist, to maintain my individual timeline, my linear existence. But I could feel the pull of blood, of genetics, of destiny coded into DNA that had been manipulated for generations. The Harrington curse wasn't a curse at all. It was an evolution, a transformation into something that could survive the coming collapse of reality. The reunion lasted forever and ended instantly. Time had no meaning in that house, in that gathering. I spoke with ancestors who gave me advice about events that hadn't happened yet, played with descendants who remembered me as a legend, shared meals with versions of myself that had made different choices. When I finally left, or was allowed to leave, the sun was rising on November 1st, but my phone showed it was still October 31st. My car's clock read December 3rd. Time had become negotiable, subjective, a matter of perspective rather than fact. I drove back to Seattle in a daze, trying to process what I'd experienced. The city looked different now. I could see the layers of time, the past and future existing simultaneously. I saw buildings that had been demolished years ago, standing solid next to their replacements. I saw people who were dead walking alongside the living, unaware they occupied different temporal states. My normal life was over. The Harrington blood had awakened fully, and with it came the sight, the ability to perceive time as it really was. Not a line but a web, interconnected and mutable. I tried to return to work, but how could I focus on marketing campaigns when I could see the company's future bankruptcy, its past glory, its potential timelines all at once? Messages started arriving from family members, some not yet born, others long dead. They came through emails that predated the internet, letters that aged backward, phone calls from numbers that would exist next century. The family business needed tending, reality needed shepherding, and I was, whether I wanted to be or not, a Harrington. The next reunion is scheduled for 1987, which already happened, but which I'll attend for the first time next year. Time travel isn't travel at all for us, just a shift in perspective, like turning your head to look in a different direction. The family will be there, all of them, even the ones who haven't been born yet, even the ones who've evolved beyond physical form. I've started keeping a journal, though the entries aren't chronological. Yesterday's entry is about my death in 2089. Tomorrow's is about my birth in 1980. The journal itself exists in multiple states, sometimes blank, sometimes full, sometimes written in languages I haven't learned yet. The hardest part is maintaining enough linearity to function in normal society. I have to remember that most people experience time sequentially, that they can't see their deaths approaching while simultaneously remembering them. I have to pretend surprise at events I've already experienced from different temporal angles. Mourn deaths of people I know are still alive in other time streams. But I understand now why the Harringtons have always been wealthy, always been influential. When you can see all possible futures, investment becomes easy. When you can communicate across time, you can warn yourself about mistakes before you make them. When death is just another state of being, you can plan for centuries. The collapse grandfather mentioned is coming. I can see it now, feel it in the way time stutters occasionally, the way parallel realities bleed through. Most people write it off as déjà vu or Mandela effects, but it's reality preparing to fold in on itself. And when it does, the Harringtons will be ready. We'll be the guides through the chaos, the ones who can navigate infinite possibilities without losing ourselves. Blood calls to blood. Time calls to time. And somewhere, in every moment that ever was or will be, the family reunion continues, preparing for the future that's already happened, happening, will happen. Welcome to the family business. There's no retirement plan, but then again, when you exist across all time simultaneously, retirement is just another word for perspective. Epilogue. The tapestry of terror. These 5 encounters, these glimpses behind reality's curtain, have taught me that horror isn't about monsters or ghosts or things that go bump in the night. True horror is the realization that reality itself is negotiable, that the rules we depend on are more like suggestions, and that humanity exists in a carefully maintained bubble of ignorance that could pop at any moment. The abandoned school showed me that trauma can wound physical space, creating pockets where time loops and consciousness persists beyond death. Those children, trapped in their eternal lessons, aren't malevolent. They're desperate, trying to escape a moment that has crystallized around them. Every abandoned building might be a tomb for moments that refuse to die, experiences that have grown cancerous and spread beyond their temporal boundaries. The Uber driver's tale revealed that death isn't an ending but a transition, sometimes a profession. Between every heartbeat, in the spaces between seconds, an entire industry of temporal shepherds works to maintain the flow of souls between states. We pass them on the street, ride in their vehicles, never knowing they exist in multiple time frames simultaneously, ferrying passengers we can't perceive to destinations we can't imagine. The storage unit opened my eyes to the infrastructure of impossibility, the vast network of containers holding back things that shouldn't exist but do. In every city, in every storage facility, there are units that contain more than old furniture and forgotten memories. They're prison cells for anomalies, feeding stations for entities that exist on the borders of our reality, archives of impossible events that someone has to maintain. The late-night train station demonstrated that abstract concepts require transportation too, that ideas and emotions and fundamental forces travel through our reality using pathways we've built but don't understand. Every subway system, every train station, every transit hub is potentially a convergence point where the abstract and concrete mix, where death can catch the red eye and love can be delayed due to track maintenance. And the family reunion, that gathering outside of time, showed me that humanity itself is evolving, developing abilities to perceive and navigate the true nature of reality. Some bloodlines have been cultivating these traits for centuries, preparing for a future where linear time collapses and all possibilities exist simultaneously. Together, these stories weave a tapestry of a world far stranger and more dangerous than most people realize. We live in a haunted universe, not haunted by the dead but by possibilities, by alternate realities pressing against our own, by concepts given form, by time that refuses to flow in only one direction. But perhaps the most terrifying revelation is that this is necessary. The horrors, the anomalies, the impossible things, they're all part of a system we don't understand, a mechanism that maintains reality itself. The storage units contain things that would otherwise contaminate our world. The time-displaced trains carry concepts where they need to go. The traumatized buildings serve as warnings. The evolved families prepare for futures we can't prevent. We are not alone in this reality. We share it with things that shouldn't exist, with people who aren't quite people anymore, with ideas that have taken physical form, with the dead who refuse to stay dead and the living who exist across multiple time frames. The walls between states are thin, maintained by those who've sacrificed their normal lives to serve as guards, guides, and shepherds. Every shadow might hide a dimensional weak point. Every mirror might be a window to somewhere else. Every abandoned place might be home to moments that loop eternally. Every family might carry genetic modifications, preparing them for impossible futures. Every job might secretly involve maintaining the barriers between what is and what shouldn't be. The truth is that reality is a consensus, fragile and constantly under threat. Most people live their entire lives without seeing behind the veil, and that's a mercy, because once you've seen the truth, once you know what lurks in the margins, you can never go back to ignorance. You become part of the system, whether as a guardian, a witness, or a warning. These stories aren't fiction. They're preparation. Because the changes are accelerating, the barriers weakening, and someday soon, everyone will have to confront the truth that reality is far stranger, far more dangerous, and far more wonderful than we ever imagined. Until that day comes, we continue our work in the shadows, in the storage units, in the train stations after midnight, in the abandoned places where time has gone wrong. We maintain the illusion of normalcy so others can sleep peacefully, unaware of how thin the walls of their reality truly are. But if you start noticing things, if shadows move wrong, if you see trains that shouldn't exist, if storage units call to you, if abandoned buildings whisper your name, if your family seems to exist in too many time frames at once, know that you're not going crazy. You're just beginning to see what was always there, waiting in the periphery, in the spaces between seconds, in the gaps between what is and what might be. Welcome to the truth. Try not to let it break you. We need all the help we can get.